If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
What real-life supernatural and terrifying being encounters have you witnessed firsthand that would give substance to the claim that there might be something else out there?
Advice needed. What do I do? So, I think I have a hellhound watching me. I've been seeing this black, shadowy dog with glowing eyes, sharp teeth, and claws out of the corner of my eye in my house more often lately, more and more as the days go on. Sometimes I'd hear heavy breathing at night, but tonight it's escalated to the point that I've heard heavy breathing and a growl once. I don't own a dog. I've slept with a sharp object by my bedside for a month now. Frankly, I'm quite anxious about it. I've heard hellhounds often show up to people in dreams before their soul is about to be collected by a demon they made a deal with, which I did not do, or are close to their end. I'm still quite young, so I don't know what to do. This is one of my closest supernatural encounters so far. Also, I assure you I do not have any family history of schizophrenia or any other hallucination-related mental illness, nor am I on drugs. Woman in white. I was driving home one night after spending time with a partner. I went around a bend, and a lady with pale white skin, long blonde hair, and wearing a long white dress jumped out at me from some trees. I thought she was somebody trying to reach an end of sorts, but she was basically glowing. She looked ethereal, as if she wasn't totally human. She was looking at me when I first noticed her there, then she immediately tried to run into the road but didn't get in front of my car as I swerved instinctively. At the time, I believed her presence represented something very sad about a life struggling with mental illness, but as I reflect on it more, I now think it may have been something beyond my understanding. This same area has had other occurrences, including, with another witness with me driving, somebody in broad daylight wearing a long trench coat and a gas mask and holding another gas mask in hand walking alongside the road, never looking up, seemingly indifferent to the external world. The figure was just walking, with its head tilted down, around the bend. I have had many things that seem supernatural happen in my life, but I am just now reaching out to gain some sort of insight on this. Anything helps, I am intensely curious. This incident occurred in Texas approximately a year ago. What could this have been? Knocking on the window. So it started when I was around 7 to 8. It was around 3 in the morning. My parents had left around 20 to 30 minutes ago, and they called me saying that they had arrived at work and I should get some sleep. Since I have insomnia, it's hard for me to sleep either way, and I had been there just watching my phone. That's until I heard that something or someone was knocking. I initially thought someone was playing a prank, but since it was 3:50 at that point and the neighbors typically don't wake up until 5 or 6 a.m., I realized that the knocking was coming from the window instead of the door, which I found strange as I was about to check. I remember that the window is 6 to 7 feet tall. No one in that apartment complex was 6 to 7 feet tall. Either way, I asked who was there because I was a child and stupid. It didn't say anything, but I heard an eerie cry like it was wailing or something. I couldn't tell since I was in a panic frenzy, and I woke up my sister, and I told her someone was knocking on the window, and once I said that, the knocking on the window started again but louder and more forceful. I started to record at this point and sent it to my parents. Thinking that it was someone trying to break in, they sent some of their workers. It would take time to fix the issue, and everything that followed was part of that process. Then the knocking/banging stopped. I thought the thing, or whatever it was, left until it started banging on the door for 15 minutes. At this point, I wanted to cry, but my sister said, "Don't, and keep recording." And for those 15 minutes, I was terrified. I couldn't do anything. After, 30 minutes, it was around 4 in the morning. The worker came and said that no one was there and it looked like someone or something had never been there. I remembered this story about 3 years ago and showed my friend the recording, and I told her the whole story, and later that day my phone stopped working. The file was lost after changing phones, and when I asked my parents if they could send me the file of that day, it didn't work, it said error. I sent it through DMs, so she should have been able to download that file, but she couldn't, or she didn't. To this very day, we don't know what or who it was. I also took photos that day when we were outside, and the worker saw a shadow-like figure on the window. However, like the recording, those photos vanished and could not be saved. So I'm asking here if anyone has had a similar experience or knows what this could be. Small towns are scary. Back in 2021 to 2022, I was a 10th grader in a small town in Pennsylvania. I moved away the summer after this grade, and I never gave anything a thought until tonight. I remember one day I was with a few friends in the locker room showers hiding from the teacher so we could skip the mile. We were discussing the concept of the third eye and whether it can be opened, a belief I hold because I grew up with my mom practicing Buddhism. We researched various methods to open the third eye, and I attempted one of them to see if it would be effective, but I felt no difference afterward, leading me to believe it didn't work. Never gave it a second thought and went about my day like normal. Everything was fine until the next day when we had to go to a rarely used room in the school to put away some supplies we had used to clean up the gym after homecoming. The room was dimly lit with what looked like some disgusting stain in the corner. It was big and yellowish orange and very out of place since the carpets had gotten shampooed the summer before and this stain looked years old. There was a low humming sound no one else could hear, and there was a breeze coming from nowhere. This room made me wildly uncomfortable. After that period, I couldn't shake the sensation of someone following me. I looked around my shoulders and through doors and windows and saw nothing. Whatever was following me didn't want to be seen. Yet. After that day I fell into a heavy dissociation, and it felt like I was flying through time on another plane. What snapped me out of it was when I started seeing this big, tall, and slender silhouette of what looked like a man with an early World War I gas mask. He would peek behind the corners and in doorways or even in windows, and I could hear the footsteps the longer this went on. Eventually he followed me out of the school and stood outside my bedroom door every night and every morning. The scariest part about it is I didn't feel like I was in any danger. Whatever this entity was, it was watching over me for some reason, and I couldn't determine whether it was out of curiosity or a desire to protect me. When I finally mentioned it to my counselor, I was diagnosed with a major depressive disorder and paranoid anxiety disorder. I didn't feel paranoid, and I didn't feel anxious. I just felt watched. None of my friends believed me when I told them, and they started to drop me because they thought I was being crazy for attention. My family thought I was being imaginative and started making up things to go along with it in an unserious manner. The only person who believed me and saw what I saw was the school's only student with Down syndrome, and they told me to stay away from her because I was a bad influence. I never figured out what that thing was, but I know I could see it because of that day when I opened my eye. It never followed me out of town, but I still remember its face, and I'll never forget it. If anybody happened to have seen this thing too, please tell me so I know I'm not crazy. The white-dressed girl. This was years ago. It was winter, December 2012. I was 7 years old, and this story is a true event that happens to come back to me in nightmares because I hated the thought of this, but I would rather speak of it now. It was December 2012 in Tennessee. I was sledding down a snowy hill. I lived on a farm that my family didn't own, in a trailer down the hill. I was in the cow ranch area, the place where the cows stay during the summer and leave in the winter. I never worked on the farm, though. Anyway, I was sledding, but when I got back up the hill, I saw a girl in the distance, my age. I ran towards her. Her brown hair and beautiful dress were great, but, and this I remember so vividly, she had mud stains on her dress. It never struck me as odd since I was only 7. I played games with her, and she told me about a well that was filled in years ago. I wasn't caring about history, just fun. We ran around, and she was a lot of fun to hang around. She never told me her name or where she lived. So I asked, she refused to say and just looked sad when I asked, so we did some fun things together. God, I had fun. It wasn't as fun when I told my mother. She knows a lot of things. I told her about the girl in the white dress and how it had mud stains. She asked me again, and I pointed out the window, waving. My mom looked so scared and said, "Baby, there is no one there." I looked, scared. The girl looked mad, very mad. Now that I was scared, she didn't like it, I could tell. Her face showed a gash, from the side of her head going to the center, yet she was crying. My mother told me years later that the girl was someone who lived on this farm and was the same age as me. According to my mom, the girl fell into a buried well and perished immediately upon impact. No one knows her name, not even the person who owned the farm. He and his wife both confirmed the story. It was from the man's father. Her bones were never truly found after the well was sealed. I know this isn't the most scary or supernatural, but I hope she finds someone new to play with. I never saw her again since that day. I hope she isn't still mad at me. Figure staring at me. This happened a couple months ago, so the memory is a little fuzzy. Even right after it happened, it was hard to remember every detail. I remember waking up in a panic to find something staring at me. If I had to compare it to anything, it kind of looked like the forest demon from Smiling Friends, regarding the color, texture of the body, and size. It didn't look human. This might be wrong because it's something that I remember remembering and not something I'm too sure of, but it was just standing there smiling at me. It had this look like it knew it was scaring me. I remember frantically searching for my phone to turn the flash on, but I fumbled like an idiot in a horror movie, and it fell to the ground. I had just woken up, was panicking, and was not thinking clearly, so I hastily climbed off my bed towards the floor trying to search for it, keeping my eyes on whatever that thing was. I don't know if my legs were made of jelly or what, but I just stayed on the ground staring at it, yelling at it to stop over and over again. My dad rushed into my room and turned the light on to find me on the floor with my blanket still stuck to my body, from my heroic leap off my bed. The thing wasn't there anymore. I don't remember what he said exactly, but he was wondering if I was okay. I just stared at him in shock and kept glancing to where the thing was standing. I couldn't answer him for a second. I'd if this is related to what I saw at all, but my dad said he heard growling coming from my room before he heard me yelling. He made a sound to mimic what it was like, and it sounded more like a wail, though, so I'd what he was on about. Either way, he said it sounded animalistic. I haven't seen the thing since, but my whole life I've experienced paranormal shit. I've just never experienced something that scary before. Usually when people describe a figure standing in their room, they say that they're paralyzed and can't move, but I had full control. Sometimes I wonder if things would have gone differently if I hadn't freaked out so much and started yelling. I don't think I was dreaming, but it's still kind of hard to believe. I recently remembered and decided I wanted to share an encounter I had. Back when I was in middle school in the Pacific Northwest, I would always ride the bus home. I lived a ways out of town, pretty much in the country, and with it being Washington, we had some really thick forests. One day, while I was riding home on the bus, I saw this creature, and I couldn't determine whether I had fallen asleep and dreamed it, if it was just a trick of the light, or something else entirely. The creature was about 7 to 8 feet tall and had 4 long legs that came together at its abdomen like a canine. It had a long head shaped almost like a sword and eyes on either side, and the whole thing opened in the middle for these huge rows of teeth. It was like just a long snout. It had purplish skin with marks in it like a plum. I've never been able to find anything cryptid or mythological that looks like it. It was just standing nestled between the trees on the side of the road. For about a whole week after I saw it, our dogs refused to leave the house, and when I talked to the other kids that lived on our dirt road, their dogs were all freaked out too. Never saw it again. After the week was over, the dogs started acting normal again, and my brain kind of just swept the story under the rug. Maryland, Frederick County. Every time we visit Gambrel or Cunningham Falls Park, something strange and unsettling occurs. To start, one night, 4 of us decided to go ghost hunting with our newly downloaded Ghost Talker app. We didn't realize the park actually closed during the night, so we only drove down Gambrel Park Road, between Shookstown Road and Hamburg RD. That was our first mistake. I won't go over the details in depth, but I can definitely provide them if anyone is interested or has also experienced stuff. Our second, third, and finally 4th mistake was to keep going back to Gambrel. Twice during the day, hiking. The first hike wasn't too out of the ordinary, but some odd things were said by our Ghost Talker app. Second hike, uncovered some uncomfortable words and phrases later researched and paired with what happened along the hike. Unsettling. The last drive-through was around 10 p.m., from Hamburg Road to Shookstown Road on Gambrel Park Road, very similar to the first night drive we took, but slightly more unsettling as it was a lot more talkative. Please, if anyone has any similar experiences in this area or would like to further discuss with me, let me know. What malevolent spirit/creature can follow someone for life? Hi, I know I probably sound insane, but since I was a small child some sort of strange entity has followed me everywhere. I've never actually seen it, although I have heard it and felt it touch me many times. I have a vague image in my head, but I'm not sure that's what it actually looks like. When I was a kid, it spoke to me a lot. At first I thought it could be a friend, but it ended up being much more sinister. I remember one night when I was lying in my bed with a crochet blanket that had large holes for the flowers covering me instead of a sheet, and my legs were straight out on the bed. I remember hearing its deep, raspy voice say, "I have you now," before grabbing my foot and trying to pull me off of the bed. When I looked at it, all I saw was an outline of a human head and eyes that burned into me. The eyes were so small and soulless it was terrifying. I screamed, and my mom came running in, making it stop and leave. I slept in my mom's room for a month after that. Every now and then I would hear that voice, but another big time was when I was living in another town. I was by the woods at sunset to draw, and I heard it say, "I'm coming towards you," in a sing-song, mocking voice. What was even more horrifying was that I heard someone sprinting towards me from the woods. I got up and ran as fast as I could to get home. I could feel its breath on my neck as I ran. "I have you finally," I heard from behind me. I nearly cried when I got inside and locked the door. I was home alone, so I spent the rest of the night until my mom got home on the couch with a knife. I did not sleep even after she got home. Even after then, I still feel and occasionally hear it. It has never fully left. I just want to know what this thing is. If you have any idea, please let me know. I swear I'm not crazy. Sighting in Ireland. I know this is going to sound crazy. I sometimes wonder whether I hallucinated the whole thing. But this community is the best bet I have for answers. When I was in high school, we had the opportunity to take a trip to Ireland. It was expensive, but I was lucky enough to qualify for a scholarship to go. Most of the time was spent seeing castles and taking historical tours. We spent one morning at a park in Ballincollig. As you can imagine, high schoolers are hard to corral. My friend Alex, not real name, and I ended up separated from the rest of the group. It's not like a huge park like you imagine in the US, so we weren't stressed about getting lost or anything like that. We were just walking around and mostly complaining about the stuff we didn't get to do. In one particularly dense part of the woods, Alex suddenly stopped and went silent. He looked at me, completely serious, and asked me if I'd heard something. I honestly hadn't and thought he was just messing around. What happened next confuses me to this day. I heard something that sounded at first like an animal. Think twigs breaking underfoot. But then, and I know this sounds unbelievable, I caught a glimpse of a person. They were around 3 feet tall, wearing a dark red jacket, and hunched over. I didn't get a great shot because there was some brush, and the thing was maybe 20 feet away. It was only for a few moments, but I'm certain of the details that I saw. I didn't see where it went or how it left, but it moved out of view very quickly. Alex and I exchanged nervous glances, and I asked if he'd seen anything. He said that he didn't, but he suggested we go find the rest of our group. I was too embarrassed to explain what I thought I saw, so I didn't tell him then, and I've never told anyone the whole story except for my wife. Any thoughts on what I might have seen? Weird occurrence. What do you think it was? I remember when I was younger, I was out playing with my friend in her grandparents' yard. We spent almost every day together doing that, but this is the only time anything strange ever happened. It was midsummer, and we'd been outside most of the day. Earlier, I had gone down to my nan's house for lunch before heading back out. She told me to come home when it got dark. It wasn't completely dark yet, so I wasn't in any rush. When we went back to my friend's grandparents' place, we wandered closer to the woods and started making mud pies. I remember the light fading strangely fast, like it got darker all at once. Then I started hearing a whistling coming from inside the woods. My friend didn't hear it at all. I thought she was messing with me at first, so I tried to get her to go closer, but she refused to step into the woods. I could hear it clearly. My nan used to whistle sometimes, and it sounded like one of the little tunes she'd sing. Then I heard her voice. It was my name, called out from deeper in the woods, and there was fear in it. Real fear. It made the hairs on my arms stand up. I froze. My friend still heard nothing. I didn't know what to do. It was Nan's voice, without a doubt, but I knew she was at home. She would have had to pass us to get into the woods. We would have seen her. And she would never go up there anyway, especially alone. I stepped a little closer to the trees, not all the way in, but enough to try to make sense of it. Logically, it didn't make sense. But if it wasn't her, then what was it? The moment I got closer, a wave of exhaustion hit me. It was sudden and heavy, like I'd been drained all at once. It put me into a weird dreamlike state. Everything looked darker and more sinister, but the overwhelming tiredness was something I couldn't mentally fight off. I sat down because I physically couldn't move away. It was like the energy was suctioned out of me. All I wanted to do was sleep. My friend came over, confused, and started poking at me before eventually dragging me away from the woods. As soon as we moved back, the sky seemed a little brighter again. The tiredness lifted almost instantly. I ran home and told my nan what had happened. She said it must have been the fairies and told me never to go back there at night again. I listened. I never went near those woods after dark. To this day, I still don't know what it was. We refer to nearly all supernatural occurrences in this area as the fairies, but upon closer examination, this particular case resembles the characteristics of a skinwalker or a mimic. But the sudden draining of energy? Whispers at night. I'm not really sure where to go with this information, mostly because I don't want people to think I'm crazy, but I thought that if I got it off my chest, it might help. Things started years ago. I'm not really sure of the specific date, but I remember I was young, maybe around 10 years old, because it was during the time when I'd sometimes share a bed with my brother due to the cold weather. We couldn't plug in more than one heater around the house because the electricity would go out in whatever room the heater was plugged into. Anyway, one night I was sleeping like usual when I randomly woke up. There wasn't any noise or sudden movement that caused it, I just opened my eyes. It was strange because I've always been a heavy sleeper unless I had to use the restroom, but I didn't need to at the time. As I was trying to fall back asleep, I heard a sound. At first I brushed it off since I couldn't really make it out and didn't care enough to focus on it, but the more I heard that specific noise, the more I tried to understand it. Then I realized it was my name. It was such a faint whisper that it was hard to tell where it was coming from. At first, I thought it was my brother. The voice was slightly more feminine, but I still figured it could be him trying to prank me. The door was slightly open and the small hallway light was on. We were both young, so our parents let us sleep with the hallway light on so we wouldn't get scared, so I could see his face. I turned my head slightly toward him and waited to see if the sound came again. I heard my name again, clear enough this time, but his mouth wasn't moving. At that point, I started to get scared. The voice was so clearly saying my name. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct, too distinct to be brushed off as the wind or some outside noise that just happened to sound like my name. I was sure it was someone. I wanted to check outside the room, but for some reason, I was utterly terrified to even step off the bed. It wasn't a regular bed with space underneath it, just a mattress on the floor, so I don't even know why I was that scared to simply step off it. I was a child, sure, but my curiosity usually won over my fear at that age. Still, I felt paralyzed. Some part of me was convinced that someone or something was outside my room, calling my name, and that if I tried to get out of bed, something bad would happen. So instead, I lay back down and got closer to my brother, but I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing it until I started crying. I even began praying, which was strange for me. I wasn't really religious, and I was a kid, so I didn't fully remember any of the prayers. But at that moment, I remembered the Our Father prayer perfectly. So I prayed all night, crying my eyes out. Before I knew it, it was morning. I must have tired myself out and fallen asleep because I don't remember how that night ended. After that, I spent many more nights in my brother's bed over the years until we got older, but I never heard that same noise again. Now that I'm older, I hadn't really thought about that night, not until recently, at least. I moved back into my parents' house to get some things in order with my life. The room I stayed in back then isn't a bedroom anymore. My parents use it for storage since all my siblings and I already moved out. But every time I pass by it now, the door is always slightly open. No matter the time of day, it disturbs me. I refuse to walk in unless someone's with me. And no matter how many times I close that door throughout the day, by the next time I walk past it, it's open again. Maybe it's just my parents walking in throughout the day or the cat pushing it open. It's not a door that clicks shut, the lock mechanism part is broken off, so the door can just be pushed open. But I don't know, maybe it's just my mind playing tricks on me. Still, if anyone has another explanation, I'm open to it because the longer I'm here, the more irrational I feel about this thing that was supposed to just be a moment from my past. Weird encounter of some kind. So I did some research, but nothing is close enough to what I'm looking for. A few weeks ago I was walking my dog, and he stopped dead in his tracks. So I think, maybe he is about to piss or shit or something, but then I hear what sounds like an eagle screech, and a flash of turquoise light flashes from behind my apartment building towards the dumpster, which was to the front left of me. I didn't see what it was because the building was still to my right. But as soon as the screech stopped, so did the light. I am scared at this point because I don't know where either of the things came from. I loosen the leash on my dog, who still won't move, and I peek around the side of the apartment building, but I don't see anything. Since I'm not a dumbass in a horror movie, I decide to go the opposite way and walk my dog. I was staying at my in-laws' house. I always feel the need to clarify that I don't drink, take drugs, or have mental health issues, and I wasn't feeling sleepy at the time. So I was sitting on the bed in the room I was staying in, facing the doorway to the room, which opened into a lounge room, with a hallway off to the right. It was early evening, and it may have still been light outside, but all the lights were on in the rooms, so it wasn't dark at all. I was giving my young daughter a sippy cup of milk as it was her bedtime. My 12-year-old stepdaughter was sitting on the bed beside me. We'd been sitting quietly for a while, and then I heard a rustling type noise. That's the only way I can describe it. The noise caused me to look toward the doorway, and I saw a dark/black figure glide across into the middle of the doorway. It was facing me the whole time, as in it didn't walk across and then turn to face me. It was a solid black. The outline of it showed that it was wearing a trench coat and an old-style brimmed hat. I knew it was he, and I knew he was looking at me, even though I couldn't see any features at all, just the black shape. I was so frightened because it's not something that I've ever seen before. After what felt like a couple of minutes but was probably only 30 seconds or so, it glided back to the right, the direction it had come from, while still facing my direction, and disappeared out of my sight. As soon as it was gone, my stepdaughter said, "I just saw a ghost." I hadn't said a single thing during this, so I know she saw what I saw. I went and found my husband, who does not believe in anything. I thought he was going to tell me not to be stupid and not believe me, and I told him what had just happened, and he told me he saw it the night before when he went to the bathroom. He didn't tell me because he didn't really think about it. This incident has changed my ideas about things. There is no logical explanation for this, and I really wish I had an answer to what it was. I think I'm a magnet for supernatural stuff. So my most recent incident happened last night. Here I was thinking 2021 would be different. To be honest, I was watching a corny movie, but it was okay. I'm happy. I finally have someone that seems to treat me right, cooks, cleans, offers reassurance, and does that top. So I walk outside to smoke, lost in my bliss, and I see it. Now I've seen things before that were ghosts. It's happened a few times, so it doesn't faze me. But this wasn't a ghost. I walk outside to stand on my porch, and I see a tall, slightly hunched over figure. It had long arms and eyes that reflected light or barely glowed. Although it was dark, I saw the figure run into the woods under the streetlights. Now I'm a country nerd. I can hunt or play MTG. But I could hear its footsteps. It wasn't a deer or squirrel. It ran on 2 feet and was fast. But then I heard it let off a weird scream/howl. I'm not sure how to describe it. I've been looking it up, but all I've seen are Dover demons. The worst part. I poured salt at my doors because I don't know what else to do. I woke up today with a break in the line and what I'd call toe prints. So I guess salt doesn't work. So I'm creeped TF out. Early morning drive home. I, now a 36-year-old female, had an encounter I've been thinking about for years. It probably happened around 2011, when I was approximately 22. I was home on a Friday or Saturday night. My roommate and best friend came home between 10 p.m. and midnight. I can't remember how late it was. I knew a guy friend who was getting married soon and was having a bachelor party 2 to 3 hours away. His friends and he were messaging us to join them, and, being young and naive, we agreed, sure, why not? We made the trip, and everyone was either asleep, drunk, or getting close to being drunk. We hung out for a bit. My friend drank twice as much because she knew I couldn't handle alcohol and I was the driver, so she took my drink along with hers whenever we were offered some. She could hold her alcohol. It was pretty impressive. After a night of jokes, drinks, and eating at a 24-hour restaurant like Perkins for my friend to sober up, we headed home. While driving home, the sun started to rise behind us. We were traveling west, obviously. I happen to be a very cautious driver, and usually around sunset and sunrise, when driving, I watch for animals crossing busy highways and bad morning drivers. This is where it gets weird. After being on the road for a bit, I looked in my rearview mirror and saw someone in the back seat. It was sitting directly behind my friend. It had a potato sack over its head, so I couldn't tell if it was female or male. It didn't have a face. I also believe it was wearing black clothes. I don't, however, remember if it had indentations for where one would see a mouth or eyes. I don't think it did, honestly. I did a quick look behind me and saw nothing, but looking in the rearview mirror again, it was still there. I froze but remained calm since I was driving and spoke to my friend quietly because I was pretty scared, even laughing a bit nervously, which I do sometimes. Hey, don't freak out, but do you see anything in the back seat? No? I looked again, and it was suddenly gone. I then explained to her what I saw. The trip was quiet for a bit, and there was like a weird pressure/tension in the air. I ended up praying in my head and then listening to Disney or pop music songs the rest of the way. Once home, that feeling remained. It was still a presence I couldn't explain that lingered for several days. It felt like I was being watched and that I didn't feel safe in my apartment. I didn't know what to do. I spoke with another friend, and they told me to go through each room and pray, or something. It's hard to remember at this point. Since he was normally a skeptic of any such things, for him to feel fearful for my safety and take it very seriously made me feel heard and that I wasn't crazy. Eventually, things felt better. Over the years I still think of what I saw. I can't remember much else about that day or the days around it. It was the weirdest thing. I tried to look or research into what it was I saw, but I couldn't find anything at the time. I know some may think it may have been from lack of sleep or from watching a horror movie or something that had something similar. In later years, I would randomly remember this night, and whatever was in the back seat, I would do another search. I discovered that there were some horror villains that would take on something similar to what I saw, but it was never exact. Also, I actually never watch horror movies or scary movies. I can't. I have vivid nightmares if I do. So I just avoid them. The one time I watched a horror movie was as a kid, and it was about something I believe called The Frighteners, and I had nightmares about it for so long that I determined I wouldn't watch horror movies. Even if my friends wanted to, I literally would pass and stay home. I didn't care, I don't like horror films. So, I can't say I was inspired by a horror/scary movie, books, posters, or anything like that because I avoided it all, and my experience was so specific and vivid. If it were real, I wish I knew its purpose and why it was there. But I suppose I won't ever know and will just have this lasting memory of what I saw. I had an intriguing experience a few years ago. Some people came to the office where I worked for a meeting. There were 4 of them. One of them was magnetically beautiful and not dressed for the cold weather. She wore a gold wrap garment and just smiled at me and exuded love. She smiled at me, and I smiled at her for about 20 seconds. And then they all went into a conference room. When I asked later where she was, the other 3 looked at me like I was crazy. She wasn't there apparently. But I saw her and interacted with her. Supernatural event. I have an unexplained thing that happened to me and my friend years ago. One night we decided to sneak into a golf course around midnight with golf clubs to mess around and hit some balls. We managed to find a way in and walk to the back part of the golf course. We stopped on a fairway to try and shoot some balls, but it was so dark we couldn't really do anything. We were just walking around laughing, and then suddenly, from far out over the trees on the edge of the course, a solid beam of light starting at the ground shoots upwards, kind of like a shooting star. It was a solid beam from the ground to the top. Once it got to a certain height, it stopped and just faded out. It was an extremely bright white color but also kind of rainbow. It was so bright it lit up the entire area. It made zero noise whatsoever and was completely straight and vertical. The area around the golf course is literally just cornfields and a few houses. I've looked up a ton of things and have yet to find an explanation for this. About 15 years ago I started dating a beautiful 21-year-old redhead when I was 23. After seeing each other for some time, we started getting more serious, and she would occasionally stay overnight. The 3rd or 4th night she stayed, she said she had something we needed to talk about, which of course made me quite nervous. She broke down into this long explanation about how something terrifying and evil has followed her around ever since she was little. She said it was large and black and made her very uneasy, only appearing at night. She said she felt it was only fair to warn me if we were going to continue this relationship. I reassured her calmly, but in my head, I was very skeptical and laughed it off. Knowing what I know now, I would have cut our relationship off at that exact moment. She started staying with me considerably more, and a few weeks later I woke up in the middle of the night. It had to be around 2 to 4 a.m. I went from a dead sleep to wide awake in a split second and noticed it was absolutely freezing in my room, painfully cold. I figured a window had to have gotten left open, and right as I was thinking that, this horrible and prominent feeling of dread came over me. I could feel something behind me, and this wasn't just the feeling of someone starting. My blood ran cold, something was there. I turned around, and standing next to her side of the bed was something I still fail to properly describe. I'll do the best I can. It was tall. My house had 7.5-foot walls, and this creature bent over halfway up its back to fit within that height. It was covered in a cloak because its features weren't clear at all. Even if they were clear, I wouldn't have been able to see what it was because it was so black it was like it absorbed all light. I froze in dread, panic, fear, and nausea. I don't know if I stared at it for 2 seconds or 5 minutes, but when I broke away, I pulled the blanket over my head and turned my back as fast as I could. I'm not a coward, I never have been, but I knew immediately there was no humanly way to avert this creature. I kept dating her because the intimacy was incredible and she was super fun. That was the only time I saw it. She was telling the truth the whole time. The image of that thing is still seared into my mind after all these years. I'm still clueless about what it was and wouldn't want to know at this point. Haunting encounter with the masked shadow man. I have a story that still haunts me to this day. I haven't shared anything on here until now, but this is my friend's favorite story of all time, so I thought I could share it. I was in my senior year of high school, around 2012, and I had stayed up a bit too late watching Doctor Who. Realizing it was late, I went to go to bed, and in an effort to get comfortable, I rolled over in my bed when I saw what looked like the silhouette of a person. It was wearing a mask and holding a kitchen knife, both of which weren't silhouetted. The mask looked like the evil cousin of the typical happy and sad theater masks, but this one had angry eyes with a large smile. I looked at this thing for what felt like ages, trying to make out what it could be in the dark. Sometimes a pile of clothes looks creepy in the dark, maybe this was like that. I held my gaze on it as I reached for my lamp, only to see it disappear as I turned on the light. There was just an empty wall, nothing I could have mistaken it for. I told myself, Out of sight, out of mind, and decided I would close my eyes, turn off the lights, and throw the covers over myself. I still needed to try and sleep. That's when I felt something thin and blunt pressing into the middle of my back, right where your bra would meet your spine. It pressed harder and harder, not letting up until it couldn't press any harder. My back was arched from the pressure, and I was frozen in fear. People tell me it could have been sleep paralysis, however, I have no history of it, and it was also before I ever fell asleep. Usually sleep paralysis happens as you wake up, not as you get into bed. Eventually the pressure let up, and I was able to move again. I immediately got up, turned on the light, and started looking around to see if one of my brothers had pranked me. Both were dead asleep, my parents were dead asleep, and there was no sign of anything besides an insane knot in the center of my back. After that I slept with my closet light on every night to shine a light on that spot. 2-ish months later that mask showed its face at the end of my dream, only for me to wake up to the sound of my dad trying to put out a fire in our attic right above my room. Our pipes were frozen, and he had a space heater in the attic trying to warm the pipes. To be safe, he was checking on the space heater every 5 minutes. The fireman said the space heater malfunctioned and proceeded to catch itself and everything around it on fire. Within the 5 minutes my dad was gone, it was too big to put out. All of this happened immediately above where I saw that masked shadow person. I've never known how to explain all of this. But after we rebuilt the house, I never saw it again. I've had other supernatural experiences, but they were all harmless. This one was my first and most intense one of them all. I have no idea what it is. This will be short. It happened a couple years ago and has stuck with me. Google is useless. My husband was in the kitchen washing dishes, and I was hanging out in the bedroom watching TV. He walked in asking if I was just in the kitchen. I answered no. He then proceeds to tell me he swears I was just in there, standing just in his periphery wearing my red plaid jammy pants and white t-shirt that I hadn't worn that day. He started talking to me for a few minutes before turning around because I wasn't responding at all. He says he caught a glimpse of me. It was almost like seeing a lifeless version of myself before it disappeared. Twice since I have seen my toddler run out of the hallway, stop, and run back down the hall. It was never him. I knew where he was, let alone that the entire situation was unlike him. I don't know what to think or what it is. Why would it present me as dead? As far as I know, it's never spoken. As a child I saw a pair of bright green eyes staring at me through the back door. I still don't forget it. This is an account of something that happened when I was a child. I was very little, but I don't remember exactly how old I was. One night I woke up struggling to go to the bathroom. At the time I slept in my mother's room. I didn't have a room of my own yet. Her room was next to a mini hallway, on one side the bathroom door, and at the end the back door of the house. Back then there were only a few fruit trees and my mother's small garden. I got out of bed and went towards the bathroom. I don't remember if I was leaving or entering it, but out of nowhere I felt that impulse that many people have had, to look away for no reason. When I looked at the back door, I saw it. A pair of bright green eyes stared at me. The door was half metal, but at the top it had 3 horizontal glass bars, through which you could see the backyard. It was very dark, so I could only see the eyes. They looked like cats, but at the same time they were different. In my head, they were extremely detailed, as if they had thick eyelashes forming a pattern illuminated in the darkness. To this day, I remain unsure whether that experience was real or merely a product of a frightened child's imagination. Nonetheless, that image has lingered in my mind, and even years later, I can still recall it vividly. I wanted to share my experience to see if there is a potential explanation for this potential paranormal occurrence or if anyone else has encountered a similar circumstance. The inanimate object felt electrically charged and began shaking after stargazing in the Australian bush. This incident occurred shortly after stargazing with my mother, during which we were discussing the different constellations. I see a shooting star go past. We are in a remote area. I then, for some reason, pick up my dog's lead that was on the ground, a simple rope, and it begins shaking uncontrollably like it had an electric charge in it, as if it were battery powered or had a rapid animal thrashing in it. I yelped loudly, in no pain, and threw the lead down, and the shaking stopped. I spent the next hour and subsequent days trying to recreate what could have caused it. To no avail. I then reflected on a similar story my dad told me, at the same place in the 70s. He saw a light shining over the bush out the window, and as it slowly approached the house, maybe 300 meters away, he went to the glass window for a better look. As he leaned on the window, he felt an electric charge, became glued to the glass, shook uncontrollably, and was then thrown backwards. Hoping for any explanation or similar experiences, really quite confusing and can't explain it at all. Happy to answer more questions. Thanks. Many of my personal experiences have involved others. I had an NHI experience, a telepathic come look out the window incoming thought projection, which my best friend sitting across from me also received. Without words, but with visual acknowledgement, we both went to the window and looked out at an unidentified aerial phenomenon. I watched a shadow bounce down my stairs that seemed to behave like a ball, with sound. My dog saw it too and flipped out. An entity was in my kitchen. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. My hair stood up. Another one of my dogs stood and faced it. My partner and I have seen many entities come and go in our home. I've had telepathic events with partners, a teacher, and even a waitress I didn't know. The vast majority of these were of me receiving the info, be it a verbal thought, a concept, or, in one case, even an image like a hallucination. I list these specific events because I had a witness, human or otherwise, that also perceived what I was experiencing. Based on these experiences, I think the ones I've had that don't involve a witness are equally as valid. Of course, I weigh these against my own subjective burden of proof. For instance, I had sleep paralysis and hypnagogic hallucinations when I was a teen. I don't consider those waking images to be external beings. There are some experiences that you just know are legit. The feeling you get surpasses anything you could experience here. I don't know how to put that into words. I've experienced astral meetings, I've stood before 4 tall grays, I've existed in a blank/white plane and had a conversation with a blonde woman of some unknown wisdom, and very recently I saw my bedroom past my own eyelids as a gray leaned over towards me, and we pondered one another for a moment. I felt curiosity. We are all here to learn, as individuals, and subsequently as a whole. Evidence, particularly in the field of quantum physics, is moving in the direction of this universe being a simulation for the consciousness to explore, to learn, and to evolve. We mimic this pattern in life and in our inventions. I sometimes laugh at how we create simpler versions of aspects of our own reality, often without even being aware that we are doing so. In a universe designed for consciousness, intent is king. I intend to learn and grow and evolve, and you will do so. Send that intent outward to benevolent beings, and they will help you. We are not alone, ever. This is a true story. I had a dog who was silent. I knew she had the physical ability to bark/growl because she would do it in her sleep, but in the 12 years she was alive, I never heard her do it while awake. One night, I wake up to ferocious growling, and my wife is already awake, petrified. I get out of bed and grab the gun, thinking she has pinned a home invader somewhere in the house. I peek into the kitchen, and everything is dark like normal with the usual faint glows from appliances. I hear her in the hallway area, so I tiptoe through the kitchen and peek around the corner into the hallway, and I see her standing in the hallway growling towards the bathroom. There isn't a way out of the bathroom without going through her, and she's a scary looking 90 pounds pit bull, so at this point I know she's pinned someone in the bathroom. I turn on the kitchen light and edge towards the bathroom, gun pointed in the hallway in case something crazy happens. The light has the hallway lit up pretty good, and it shines into the bathroom, so I'll be able to see what's going on in there. I slowly peek into the bathroom, and there is a translucent, pitch black, human-shaped figure there. Taller than a normal person, almost. I immediately freeze because this was the last thing I expected to see. I'm not even sure what came over me in this moment, but it's like my instinct forced me to shout, "In the name of Jesus Christ, get out." And a split second after I said that, it's like it disappeared into thin air. We've had strange things happen from time to time, but this was way over the top. I grew up in a haunted house built in the early 1800s, so I'm no stranger to experiencing the unusual, but man, this one really got to me. It's been about 3 years now since that happened, and we haven't experienced any more unusual stuff, thankfully. Small man creature in basement. My husband and I were at his family's reunion a few years back. All of his cousins, about 5 of them, were sharing memories of mischief and lies they told to their parents, grandparents, etc. Then his cousin, F, asks if they remember the little guy in the basement. Every single one of their faces, all of them, went white. I was unsettled by how much they were freaking out. No one wanted to talk about it. We walked away, and my husband told me that when they were all younger, between 8 and 10-ish, they were playing in their grandparents' basement without permission and causing minor chaos. They heard a sound, and they all looked. My husband said it was a small creature that looked old and wrinkly. He was behind a shelf, but they could all see him. When he spoke, he said something like, "You children better be good, or life will be hard." My husband told me it didn't frighten him at the time, but he wasn't curious about it either. But he freaked me out with how casual he was. He was calm. Of course I wanted to hear more details. Later, After a little prodding, the cousins gave in. All of them remembered the day in nearly identical ways. They were playing in the basement. Jim broke a jar of peaches. They were laughing about the incident and discussing what they would say had happened. They heard a noise and then saw a small man-like creature. They all agreed and added to the description as the story was being remembered. The being was about 2 feet tall, looked like an old grouchy man, and wore grubby, worn-out clothes. They all said they never told anyone because they thought it was a dream or that no one would believe them. After a few minutes, my Bill wanted to change the subject because it scared him. He said he never wanted to talk about it again. So weird. Anyone else have a similar experience? What do you think it could have been? A brownie-type fae, maybe? Thoughts? When I was in college, I didn't really have to look for housing because it was just a 40-minute commute from home. But we'd decided to rent a place with 3 friends. To be budget-friendly, we were going to sign up for anti-squatting through an agency. They get all kinds of buildings that are going to be empty for a period of time, and they rent them out to people so the place is occupied and not at risk for squatters. We signed up and are waiting for a place to become available. And then they backed out. I eventually moved into an old school building without my friends but with other people through the agency. The building was so big, we hardly saw each other at all. Moved my cat in with me. The place had a certain vibe. Not exactly inviting. You know those horror movies, you just know something is going to happen. The entire building had that vibe. Toilets were a good walk away from my classroom/studio. And I would pass a really long corridor with classrooms with huge windows all along the hallway. Whenever I had to make that walk after sundown, I would see stuff from the corners of my eyes. Behind the windows of those dark classrooms, it would feel like there were those black demon-like figures from the Lord of the Rings, the Nazgul. Floating behind the windows, following me around. Things escalated to the point that my cat seemed to be fighting something invisible in my room. The moment she was dragged from one side of the huge room to the other, on her side, going in the direction of her back, so it could not have been her doing, I packed her up in her carrier, got in my car, and drove home during a blizzard. When I came home, I just asked my dad to go collect my stuff with me the day after because I was not going back there alone. Dad said my older sister had called him earlier that night, asking him to go get me, because she knew I was in trouble but couldn't explain it. Dad thought she was exaggerating. When I told him what happened, he wasn't even surprised. He grew up in the city that school was in and said it was a fire station before it was a school, and way before that, there used to be a church right there. I'm not a stranger to paranormal stuff. But that building creeped me the F out. Bellevue, Ohio, angry basement. Around 8 years ago, I started staying on the couch of a friend's house. I brought my clothes and a few belongings down into the basement, and there was a crawl space around shoulder height that lay open on the white block walls. It felt so angry, I felt a completely unwarranted sense of intimidation in the air. Who hasn't had weird feelings in the basement or going up the basement steps when they were a kid, so oh well. Sometimes I would see something that resembled an unrecognizable darkness in the corner of my eye, but when I turned to look, it was nothing. Maybe my eyes were focused, but this occurrence happened a couple of times a day. One day, as I was folding my clothes, I noticed something, or nothing, in the corner of my vision. I rested my eyes on my clothes and didn't move. I just stared and saw a figure. A dark figure of nothing in the shape of a cloaked figure, maybe wearing one of those long business coats and a build hat. There was no definition. Once I saw what it was, I looked, and nothing, it was never there. One time I was lying on the couch that I don't normally sleep on in the foyer, home alone. I heard my name being called, but it was like a whisper, or it was never even said, and it was in my head. It was followed by my name being said. I got up and looked in the kitchen down the hall past the bathroom. No one was home. That was one of many. I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom, watching myself in the mirror. Through the doorway, I saw the bottom of a white nightgown silently dragging along the floor. It must have been a long nightgown. I turn around, and nothing, no one is there. I think I saw that exact same thing no more than 2 or 3 different times. There was also a cat, not a living cat. I was watching TV, and in the corner of my eye I saw a dark figure on the floor. At this point, I had already encountered the man in the hat, so I knew not to look at the dark figure. I stared at the TV, watching my peripheral vision. It was a cat, a little cat, on the floor, dark nothingness with no definition. Exactly like the man but unlike the nightgown. After this, I spoke to Amber and asked her about the cat. I asked her if she had a cat, and she said, "So you figured it out?" She wouldn't tell me because she wanted me to figure it out myself. There is no way to believe someone about their house being haunted until you figure it out yourself. I've never experienced such events in my life. I was 28 at the time, and I didn't believe in ghosts. When I was younger, I wanted to believe in ghosts, but common sense and life experience convinced me that they weren't real. I never saw anything in the basement. It was always angry, resonating a sense of dread. Nothing was in the crawl space, just the floor of the foyer and living room. It was clean but so taunting. The house had many experiences for me over the few months that I stayed there. It makes me wonder what else is real. Why are the figures you can only see in a mirror invisible to your central vision, and why are there figures you can see in color and almost see the fabric's textures through a mirror? Growing up, most of my friends were afraid of anything paranormal, so we just never talked about it. Well, sometimes I tried, but girls would leave my sleepover birthday party because they got too scared. Oops. Well, I think anyone who has been around the supernatural community for any amount of time has heard about Hat Man. I didn't know others knew about him, and frankly, I'm not sure my Hat Man is the same as others, although physically speaking, he sounds similar. Mine had a top hat like Abe Lincoln and a really long face, but he also had a long trench coat like a cowboy. He didn't look frightening. I actually met someone in my early 20s that mentioned Hat Man, and I was like, wait a minute, I've seen him too. And then another friend in that group slept over once, and he saw him in my house. Very strange. But again, my experience with him was never negative or even scary. Your initial post mentions angels, and I can't help but feel like he was some sort of guardian for me. I feel like something demonic has been attached to me since my birth. That's a whole different story, but it felt like Hat Man was there to buffer or watch over me. And anytime something bad in my life happened, I could expect to see him sometime soon. Sometimes he would appear at the corner of my room, near the ceiling. Sometimes he'd be at the side of my bed. It was scary, but it also wasn't. I remember telling a friend in high school about the experience one night, and he asked if I had ever tried to talk to the figure. I had never even thought about talking to him. So the next time he appeared, I tried to talk, but he didn't say anything. I tried again and again, he didn't say anything. That was the final time I saw him. I know people will mention shadow people or sleep paralysis, but those do not describe my experience. I could move. I could wake up. Like I said, I could talk. I need help identifying something that haunts me. I would describe my experience as somewhat unusual. Ever since I was young, I've experienced recurring interactions with a very odd creature. I've seen it stalking me in the woods in the Midwest across multiple states. It is kind of a cone-shaped head. Think along the lines of the shape of a scythe blade. Indents where eyes would be and very bony. With a thin layer of skin that tightly stretches across its grotesque body. Typically, it moves on all fours and lunges or lopes when walking or running because of its protruding shoulder blades. No, I'm not kidding. I wish I was. I've seen it very clearly on 3 occasions and felt its presence on others. I'm lost and confused and frankly still scared. Any information would help. Thank you. The crossroads of the spirits. I won't begin by telling you that I am rational and a skeptic. Because this is a story of things that my parents experienced. For us, it was only a beginning. For us, we are the stories that we tell. It is not a righteous life lived if our stories are tainted with untruths. Far away, in a little corner of a third country, a small family of 4 eked out a living from honest work and effort. The stories begin when I grew old enough to start remembering and learning. My father's relatives were cruel to my mother when we were children. It was a painful time for all of us. One day in desperation, my parents bought land on the outskirts of town on a hill that was densely forested and began constructing what now has become our family home. What we didn't know then was that, while this land was in a forested area, just about 50 yards uphill were 3 cemeteries and 1 cremation ground. We moved in the year 1991. The house was barely complete. We had a space that was to be used as a future garage. But we had no cars, just dreams at that point. My father hung a rope to dry clothes on, made of coconut fiber. The first time we used it was on an afternoon when it rained. The clothes weren't dry, so Mom left them out all night. The next morning, the clothesline was broken. Father decided to buy a fancier plastic rope that was strong and we knew wouldn't break, because we thought the coconut fiber rope just broke under the weight of clothes. That night, it rained again. The next morning, there was a clean cut on that plastic rope. That thick plastic rope was sliced through. There were no neighbors at all because we lived in the middle of a literal forest, and our dog had been peaceful the last few nights. When this plastic rope was cut, my mom became suspicious. One woman, who was the devotee of a particular kind of deity and a practitioner of rituals, was walking by that morning. We had only heard of her, so my mom knew her only by her reputation. Mum complained about our situation with the clothesline. This lady laughed and said, "But don't you know you tied a clothesline, disrupting the crossroads of the spirits?" That night my father was frustrated. He believed that no spirit would inhabit or traverse the land he had purchased with his hard-earned money. He took the metal wire to the garage space and tied it for use as a clothesline. My mother hung clothes as the rain thrummed steadily through the night. The next morning the metal wire was intact. Metal repels spirits. The confusing event stopped. There are numerous stories of our childhood and supernatural encounters, but this small little vignette is a precious memory. My first house was haunted. I'm sure it was the first owner and builder of the home. A shadow of a man walked in front of the TV, and you couldn't see through the shadow, but there was nothing there from the knees down. I was putting up some ceiling tiles in the master bedroom and was complaining that he did a half job on the ceiling because none of it was level. I went out to my car to get some more materials, and upon returning, the door was now closed and locked. I had to go down the street to have the locksmith come to my house and open the doors because my keys were inside. He asked if my wife or girlfriend was fighting with me and locked me out because the deadbolt was also locked. It's from my dreams, and I started to see it in real life. This has started to be a regular thing now. Every time in my dreams, I see it. That one-eyed shadowy being at the corner of my eye, watching me, stalking me as I do whatever I am doing in the dreams. These dreams sometimes feel real, sometimes they don't, and I know they are dreams. I'll try to explain this the best I can. It's a very lanky fellow with one giant eye and no mouth. The sides of its head are pointed and spiked, its body is malnourished, and the limbs are so thin I could see its bones. Every time I see it, that tall thing is just peeking behind something before disappearing off, and when I try to go over to see it for myself, it's gone. However, I remember one time I saw it. It just stood there when I laid eyes on it, and then everything changed. All of the colors melted away into a black void, with only the one standing there in front of me. Once I laid my eyes on it, I wasn't able to look away from it. It made my ears hurt with its loud, static noises and started to make everything feel like some kind of kaleidoscope, like I was floating. The overwhelming feeling of everything being so vibrant and loud made me tear up. It stepped towards me, and then I woke up. Just up until recently, I've started to see it here. In the real world, it always appears in dimly lit locations, whether it's my room or somewhere else. It appears in the corner of my eye, staring at me as if I'm the most bizarre thing in the world. And just when I look over to see it fully, it's gone. I'm unsure if I'm just imagining things or starting to show signs of schizophrenia, but I won't self-diagnose it. The being's effect on me has started to affect me in the real world, whether it be loud noises, fireworks, static sounds, etc., or violently vibrant colored things, kaleidoscopes and whatever. It just makes me feel uncomfortable and on the verge of a breakdown or something. I've found comfort in plushies and stuffed animals, so I suppose that's what keeps me feeling alright. I'm not so sure if this is anything relating to mental problems or supernatural beings, but I couldn't find anywhere else to put this. I think there's something in my apartment. My building is pretty old, dating back probably 100 years or more. It was a large house at one point but was converted into 4 apartments. We have closets that were obviously stairways and doors that are blocked off. Most of my experiences can be easily dismissed. The corner of my eye, shifts in the air that make me feel like someone walked into the room, and some footsteps. I'll mostly see something enter the kitchen from the hallway while I'm in the living room, shaped like an L. I can see the hallway, but not into it, if that makes sense. I've heard whispers in my ear, like hey, but mostly on the edge of sleep. But what's getting to me are the touches. Often in bed reading, it'll feel like something sat down or brushed by me. There are 2 times I have felt a definite touch that is not explained. The first is rather strange, and I didn't think much of it until recently. The other time was last night. I was about to go to sleep but was tossing and turning from the heat. I was not asleep. I remember being peeved at my husband for laying his arm over me when it was so hot. Within seconds of removing his hand and turning away, it happened. I heard a distinct tapping sound, as if something was hitting the top of my head. It was so distinct and hard that I had to reach up and rub the sensation away. I asked my husband this morning about it, but he had no idea what I was talking about. If it is supernatural, it's copying my daughter, who has tapped me on the head like that before. She was definitely not there last night. I don't think it's malicious, and I'm willing to do EVP sessions and even Ouija, but I've heard Ouija attracts bad entities like a magnet, rather than an EVP, which just addresses the local spirits. Does anyone have advice or experience with this sort of thing? My first supernatural experience. As a child I would often visit my grandparents' home and stay there. They lived in an older home built somewhere around 1900. I was maybe around 5 years old the first time I remember seeing a ghost. My mom says I used to talk about a dog that I used to have when I was a toddler, but I don't remember. One day while visiting, I was playing in the dining room while my mother and grandparents watched TV in the living room, which was adjacent to the dining room. I don't really remember what made me look in the kitchen, or if I just happened to be walking by and noticed him, but I stopped in front of the doorway to the kitchen, and inside I saw an older gentleman with a short white beard and mustache and a baggy coat and a flat cap pouring himself tea from our tin kettle. I had never seen him before. The floors were creaking, and the only door to the kitchen from outside is very loud when opened or closed, so if he was a living person, he would have made plenty of noise entering the house. But he just poured tea, and then he looked at me, smiled, waved, and was gone. He seemed like a really nice guy. I never told anyone I saw him. Recently I told my mom about it, and she said she used to see an older gentleman in the kitchen too. I have never seen him since. Personal encounter, first supernatural experience. I was about 7 years old when I encountered what I assumed to be a supernatural presence. The house that we moved into was built in the 50s and 60s, so it wasn't old, but it had some age to it. It happened during the day, in the basement of the house. I had a friend over, and we were in my basement playroom with my toys. I wanted to show her a creepy song I made on my mom's piano. It was just an electric piano on a stand, nothing fancy. Now I have to explain the room. When you reach the bottom of the stairs, it opens into a big room, and the piano was on the right against the wall. Directly next to the staircase on the right, essentially across from the piano, was a small room with double sliding doors that were unable to close or open on their own. All windows were closed as well. So we sat down on the stool by the piano, and I started playing my weird little song I made up. Basically, as soon as I started playing, those doors slammed shut. They didn't just slide closed. They absolutely slammed. My friend and I ran upstairs and told my mom, but I remember her just shrugging us off. I was into creepier stuff as a kid, so my mom thought I was just messing around. Other stuff happened in that house, like feeling my hair lift up and fall when I was lying on the couch in the living room. The doors were so shocking as a child, and reliving it as an adult has only strengthened my belief in ghosts. It's absolutely unexplainable. One time my parents were away for the night, and so my brother and I both invited a friend each to stay over since we had the house to ourselves. We decided we were going to order pizza for dinner, and my friend and I wanted to go for a walk, so we said we'd just order the pizza for collection and we could pick it up on the way home. After we picked up the pizza and were heading home, my brother called me panicking and asked if we could hurry home. I asked him why, and he said he and his friend were convinced someone was in the house. They'd been downstairs in the living room playing video games and heard banging upstairs. For context, our stairs in the hall are a few steps from the front door, and the living room door is further down the hall, so someone could have walked in the front door and up the stairs without them having known. I asked if he was joking, and he said he wasn't, and then I asked how sure he was, and he said the noises were really clear and that the blinds in the living room were still shaking from the banging upstairs. Our house is old, and if people jump about too much upstairs, you can see and feel the ceiling shaking a bit downstairs. I panicked and told him to stay on the phone and to leave the house and go down onto the main road if he could get out quietly, but he said they were too scared to move out of that room, and then my friend and I ran home. When we got home, we all went into the kitchen to grab random knives. I'd quote we were thinking, but we didn't want to go upstairs to check empty-handed. My friend and I heard the noises too while we were preparing ourselves to go check, to the point we were all genuinely terrified, like barely breathing because we didn't want to make a noise level of terrified. We all went upstairs, and it looked like there was a layer of smoke all over the upstairs hallway. Sometimes when I think back on that day, I wonder if we were just panicked and imagining things, but I remember the smell and the smokiness being so clear that my first thought was, oh shit, I must have left a candle on, and that's what the banging noise was, and now my whole room's probably on fire, and my parents are going to kill me. We checked my room and the other upstairs rooms first, and there was nothing out of place and no intruder in any of them, so I hadn't left a candle on. To this day, the four of us still have no reasonable explanation for the incident, and my brother and I continue to live here with our parents and our youngest brother, having never felt unsafe in the house. Well, it was when I was around 13 or 14, I was at a friend's party with 2 other people. We were home alone at this party, and it was getting late. We were just watching TV or something with our backs toward the main entrance. For context, the main door is a solid wooden door that even an adult would struggle to open in full force. We were just vibing and watching TV when suddenly the door slammed open as if it were made of paper, causing everyone to turn around instantly. When we turned around, we only saw a white object fly past the door and into the kitchen. We all just sat there baffled before someone asked, Please tell me I am not the only one that saw that thing. Which they weren't, everyone saw it. We ended up going over to the door and closing it and then searching the whole house. Nothing, absolutely nothing, was found. Sometimes, when I was home alone, I would see white shapes moving past the windows, but this stopped after a while. My dad's house was in our family for a few generations. The house always made me uneasy, especially the second floor and attic. No one acknowledged the house's dark history until I was older, and when I did bring up what I saw or felt, they made me feel silly. I have a few stories, but this is the one that always comes to mind first. I was in elementary school, living with Dad after my parents divorced. I always struggled to sleep, so I would often be up most of the night. Our bedrooms were on the second floor. If you stood in the doorway of my room, you would see the bathroom and another bedroom to your right, the banister for the stairs going down directly in front of you, and my dad's room along with the attic door to your left, further down the hall. The attic door required you to step into a little alcove to the right, and the door was on your right in the alcove, so you couldn't see it from my room. It was really late, and I was watching TV when I heard heavy footsteps come down the hall. At first, I thought it was just my dad going to the bathroom, but they got there slowly and turned around to walk back. I thought it was weird, but it wasn't until they turned around again by my dad's door that I realized the footsteps were so loud because they were wearing shoes. As they passed my door again, I realized it almost sounded like work boots. I started to get nervous, and my gerbils started to freak out inside their tank. This seemed to make the person pause. I was little and thought this was probably an intruder. Don't ask me why I thought they were pacing the halls. It made sense in my child brain. I started to panic because I couldn't get to my dad without going out into the hall. They paced back and forth kind of slowly, maybe 5 more times. It felt like forever, but I couldn't be sure if it was actually more time. I ultimately made the decision to run for the stairs and wait until they were near my dad's room. I waited with my hand on the knob, and as they reached the end of the hall, I pulled the door open and prepared to run, but obviously I looked down the hall as I stepped out. All I saw was the /flowy end of what I described as a flowy white nightgown slip around the corner to the attic. I didn't hear the attic door or anyone on the steps, though, so I paused. I slid little by little down the wall until I could see the alcove, and nothing was there. The attic was closed and latched. After what felt like an hour of being frozen in place crying in that hallway, I willed myself to walk past it and wake my dad, who was fast asleep and did not believe any of it. He offered to let me sleep in his bed. The best part, 15 years later my mom casually tells me that when she and my father moved into the home to help my great-grandmother, she made him throw out the robe hanging in the attic because she is Jewish. You're probably wondering the same thing I was. What robe? Oh, the white KKK robe that belonged to my great-grandfather was still hanging in the attic, right next to the cage where they kept their mentally disabled daughter. They didn't keep her in the attic, they kept her in the middle room, where I slept. He was a blue-collar man, he built it himself, in his work boots. I assume he built it himself, in between Klan meetings. He was often seen wearing his white robe. I told this story to both of my parents when it happened. No one thought about that robe? Every single person in my family made me feel insane whenever I brought up anything I saw or felt in that house when I was a child. Anytime I had to sleep there after that, I would take the couch on the first floor. Dad didn't even bother asking me if I wanted the house when they sold it, he already knew. Accidentally astral projected twice. Both times her was there. The first time this happened I was around 7, my sisters and I shared a room. I slept on the top bunk, which was against the wall, while they took the bottom. I could see everything clearly because we had a blue nightlight that was very bright. So one night, I had woken up sitting upright while also being beside my sleeping self. I was looking through both my eyes simultaneously, and physically, I laid back down on my back. What had woken me up was this decrepit, thin, corpse-looking woman with white glowing eyes watching me from between the bunk bed rails. I tried to move away, but she would appear closest to me wherever I moved on the bed, at either end of the bed, to my left, or to the right, just seeing eyes, her head, and fingers through the railing. Even where a wall should be, the head of the bunk was against the wall, and so was the right side. At some point she appeared at the foot of the bed and started crawling over the rails towards me like a spider reaching out one hand. I started scrambling away and pressed against the wall to my right. At that moment she was gone, and many arms and hands, including hers, came out of the wall and grabbed me. They started pulling me into the wall. I fought to pull away and almost did, but they pulled hard. I was losing all my strength and was going to give up, but before I gave in to their pull and closed my eyes, it all went black, and I shot up in bed awake and terrified. The second incident occurred approximately 5 years ago at my friend's house, A home heavily infested with entities. One of them is hers. He had been terrorized by this dead creature before we had even met. One night while sleeping over, I was plagued with nightmares, hearing my sister scream about how I hated her, my father screaming my name, and other things I can't remember. I would wake up, look around, and then sleep again, and each time I did, the bedroom door in my friend's walk-in closet went from closed to gradually opening more and more. Sometimes one light, either in the hallway or closet, would be off while another was on, but more often than not, they were both on. Eventually I did sleep but was woken up by my friend, who had sat up staring at me before looking forward and mumbling stuff unintelligibly, crying, sounding afraid, and sometimes turning to me asking if I can see it. He even pointed at her before I saw her. She had both appeared and been standing there, looking at us the entire time. At that moment, I stood up and started walking towards her, but I also felt as if I were still sitting on the bed, watching myself walk away. I could see through both my eyes simultaneously again. I watched myself turn towards my reflection, and in that moment, I could see the fear on my face while I sat on the bed. Walking with her, she had glowing white eyes and looked calm but stiff, like I was in a trance. After looking at myself on the bed, I watched myself through both pairs of eyes follow. She walked into the hallway and toward a bedroom that we never entered because it was a dark area of the house where she was often felt and seen. She walked through the bedroom door, and after that it was like the trance was over. I started stepping away, but arms and hands, including hers again, came out of the wall beside the door and started pulling me in. And just like all those years ago, I was dragged into the wall, struggling but unable to free myself, and before I gave in, I was awake in bed, trembling and feeling fuzzy and lost, having passed out at some point. I haven't astral projected since then, but I would later see her more often at his house, and each time she appeared more alive. The last time I saw her was at a friend's house nearby. Here we were at another friend's house nearby. I had gone over to my buddy's place alone to grab more liquor from our stash. There she was, watching me leaning around a corner. She looked sickly pale but alive, wearing a white dress or gown of sorts. She looked to be trying to seduce me, trying to lure me over. But I left real quick. I saw another dead woman too at some point before. She started looking alive. It had blue skin, giant round white eyes with only small pupils, and blackness swirling around like hungry tendrils where its legs should be. This thing crawled and smiled a giant, insane-looking white smile. I experienced many entities in that house and have many more outside of it, too. I'm not a religious person, and I'm skeptical by nature. I had a 2005 Ford Escape that twice would not start. Had to have it towed to a garage, and both times it started without an issue at the garage. They couldn't find any problem. I thought maybe the car alarm was failing, so I had the garage remove it. I held the alarm in my hand, so I know it was removed. As a result, the car alarm on the key fob was inoperable. My oldest son died in a vehicle wreck 5 years ago in a car wreck. He was a practical joker. Every year after his death, small, unexplainable things happen around his birthday or his anniversary. One day I was sitting in my recliner, and facing forward through my front window, I could see my car, not the Escape, which my daughter drove. The car's headlights came on for about 10 seconds, shining through the window onto me in my recliner. It happened again a day or two later and has never happened again. Both times the key fob was on a table near me, and I knew there was no way I had bumped the fob. Additionally, the fob couldn't be used to simply turn the light on and off. The time was around the anniversary of the son's death. While I didn't think it was supernatural, I couldn't think of any logical explanation. Maybe there was some sort of weird. Fast forward a few months later. It's now around the time of my oldest son's birthday. It had been almost 2 years since his death. I and my other son were in the backyard. We heard a car alarm, and we assumed it was my car. I pulled my keys from my pocket and kept pushing on the fob to silence the alarm. It wouldn't stop honking. We started walking to the front yard to see what was going on. When we walked through the gate, we saw the Ford Escape, the very one that did not have an alarm, was the vehicle going off. A few seconds later it stopped. I don't know how a car with no alarm can spontaneously start alarming. It never happened again. I asked my mechanic if he'd had any explanation, and he did not. But that is the kind of thing my deceased son liked to do as a joke. Unsettling feeling/figure. Since last Wednesday, I've mostly been home alone. I'm 20 years old, turning 21 on the 22nd, and the only regular contact I've had is my mom picking me up for work and bringing me home. My mom and my sisters did stay with me over the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, but other than that, it's just been me and my 7 dogs. My family has lived in this house for about 7 or 8 years. It's an old farmhouse that was converted into a home. Downstairs, there's an added room that we use as a kennel and grooming and bathing area. Directly above that room is my grandparents' bedroom, which is where I've been staying while they're out of town. All 7 dogs sleep in the room with me. Over the past several days, I've had a strong and persistent feeling of being watched, especially when I'm on the second floor. Along with that, I've occasionally seen what looks like a figure in the windows or near the sliding glass door that leads to the balcony. What makes this strange is that there's no physical way for someone to be outside those windows or on the balcony. The only ways into the house are through the front door or the main back door. The side door and the second back door stay locked, and when I'm in the living room, I would see or hear anyone come inside. Because of that, I can't explain how someone, or something, could be moving around the house without being noticed. I never see the figure directly. It's always in my peripheral vision, and when I turn to look, there's nothing there. My dogs have reacted during some of these moments, which is part of what's been bothering me. A few of them will growl at corners of the room or stare at places where nothing appears to be, especially upstairs. Most of these experiences happen on the second floor. The atmosphere up there feels heavier, almost tense, and the feeling doesn't go away even when I try to ignore it. I've considered that stress or being alone could be playing a role, but I've had paranormal experiences in the past, and this feels different. In the past, I've seen what I call a tall man, a figure over 7 feet tall wearing a top hat, with a completely black face. As strange as it sounds, this isn't something only I've experienced. My father saw it when he was a child, and my grandfather and great-grandfather have also reported seeing it when they were young. Because of that, it's something I've come to see as familiar, even if it's unsettling. What I'm experiencing now doesn't feel like that. This presence feels unfamiliar, and the overall feeling I get from it is negative or unhappy. I don't know what it is, and I don't want to jump to conclusions, but I can't shake the sense that something is watching and moving just out of sight. Haunted? Cursed? In 2015, I and a friend took a ride to Hoosac Tunnel, a 5-mile-long tunnel in the northwest corner of Massachusetts. In the years of its construction, it's claimed the lives of 180 or so workers. Obviously, this place is haunted. So we get to the tunnel, maybe walk about 15 to 20 feet or so into it, and it's completely black, with a feeling of dread, stagnant air, and silence. A chill ran down my back, and that's when we decided that our 2-hour-long journey needed to end. We made it home safe and sound with no issues. But in the upcoming nights, I would have very, very intense dreams of an old decrepit farmhouse, where every time I blinked, a darkish figure would appear above the house, with a static-like aura around it, and when I blinked, it would disappear. The next night my dream was like a movie. I was looking for answers in the town of the old house, going through libraries and talking to the town's residents for answers. My friend, who I went on the voyage with, worked with me at the time. And after a couple days off, we were back on the schedule together. I told him I was having some funky dreams about a figure. He looks at me like he was going to throw up and tells me he's been having a dark figure following him through his day. I told him to draw what he was seeing, and I did the same. We compared pictures, and it was almost as if we both had a photocopy of the same picture. His grandmother was from the islands and practiced Santeria. He told me she was going to cure us. I didn't question anything more after that. He told me she took care of it, and luckily we didn't see anything anymore. My supernatural experience made me a believer. When I lived in Ohio, I was at an abandoned school where we were creating a haunted house. My neighbor was big into that, so my best friend and I decided to help him build it. There were 3 deaths in this building. A janitor was killed in an accident in the boiler room, a girl fell down the steps in the middle of the building and died, and a boy in the gym died, don't know how. Gary, my best friend, and I had some off time because Dean, our neighbor, had to wait for a mold to dry on one of the dummies he made. Dean left to pick up tools, leaving Gary and me as the only 2 people in the building. We went to the gym to play racquetball, entered the equipment room, which contained a variety of items neatly stacked, and grabbed the only 2 rackets and the only 2 racquetballs before heading out to play. As I was hitting my ball, I saw something out of the corner of my eye and glanced over only to see nothing, but in the split second that I looked away, the ball disappeared. We searched for a while, then checked the equipment room, but it didn't roll by the doors. At this point we're really freaked out because we know the history, but I'm still skeptical. We couldn't find the racquetball, so we opened the door to the equipment room and discovered that everything that had been neatly on the shelves was now scattered all over the floor, except for that one racquetball. Needless to say, we ran out of there like little girls because it was our first ever experience with the supernatural. Whether you believe it or not, the experience was as genuine as it could be. I have so many stories from that building. I've got one. I am a believer. I've had many experiences before and after this event. A while ago I house sat for a friend of mine while she was on her honeymoon. She had a few cats and some plants and things, and I said sure because I loved her house. She had an old craftsman cottage built in 1920, and she and her new husband had put so much work into bringing it back to its former glory in a way that was true to the time of the house. It was gorgeous, and I've always been a sucker for historic homes. Anyway, I move in for a few weeks. I notice right away that the door to the attic is not only locked but also barricaded with 3 huge boxes of books. When I asked a friend about it, she said that the cats won't leave the door alone because there are bats in the attic. Okay, it sounded a little legit, but whatever, I'm not bothered by bats. So right away I knew something was up. My friend was not a believer and, in fact, scoffed at the mention of anything supernatural, so I didn't say anything to her about it. But I was seeing things. And hearing things. For example, once I fell asleep on the couch with the TV on. When I woke up, the TV was off, and there were black orbs in the room. You know, like in spirit photography? However, I was seeing these orbs with my own eyes. They sort of hovered between me and the TV, and I tried not to move. When I finally moved, they zipped from the room with an audible zip sound. Another time I was woken up by something in the middle of the night and saw a dark outline of something peering around the doorframe in the top corner, like whatever it was up on the ceiling. That spooked me, so I invited my fiancé to come spend the rest of the time with me. The first morning he said, casually, "This place is haunted as hell, you know." Yup, I did know. One night we heard loud dragging noises and footsteps in the attic. I called a friend, and she said it was the bats. I was like, what kind of Stephen King night shift bats are we talking about here? There would have to be Chernobyl bats to be making that much noise. Anyway, at that point I was feeling a bit uneasy about the whole thing. Anyway, you get the picture. Normal spooky stuff, but not enough to make me abandon ship. However, on my last night there I was alone for the evening, just chilling in the living room watching TV. From where I was sitting, I could see the kitchen via the reflections from some framed pictures in the little hallway that connects her front hall to the kitchen. I had left lights on, because duh, haunted house. Only in the movies do people shut off all the lights. I glanced over and saw someone standing in the kitchen, a man, turning towards the hallway so I could see his face in the reflection of the pictures. I had the distinct impression that he was watching me through the reflection. He wore a beige button-down shirt and appeared somewhat transparent, with 2 black holes where his eyes should have been. I made eye contact with this entity, and I truly mean that all the hair on my body stood up and felt electric. My primal brain knew what I was looking at. I was suddenly overwhelmed with a desperate, violent need to get out. I had never had that reaction to ghostly stuff, but I was being repelled from that house. The sensation made me nauseous. I felt like my skin was crawling, my hair was literally standing on end, and I knew that whatever it was didn't like that. I had seen it, and it wanted me to get the duck out. Thankfully my purse with my car keys was next to me because there was no way I could have done anything but go straight out the front door, which I did. I didn't even put on my shoes. When I turned around to lock the door, I fumbled the keys and dropped them. By this time, I was shaking and sweating in my eyes. As I bent down to retrieve the keys, I instantly realized that the entity was directly on the other side of the door, peering down at me from the glass top half of the door. I knew that if I stood up, I would come face to face with the entity, so I locked the door while still on my knees, keeping my eyes closed until I had turned around and made the run to my car. I had to pull over and throw up before I made it a half mile. I called a friend and explained I had had a sudden family emergency and would see them the next day to get my stuff. She offered to bring me my bag, which I had already packed up, and I said that was fine. The cats never reacted to any of this, BTW. Probably because they are half evil demons themselves. I love cats and have several. Anyway, I never mentioned it to my friend. However, about a year after, when she came home with her new baby, I suddenly heard that they had put the house on the market and moved before it sold. It was their dream house. I asked why. What happened? She told me that there was a small, unexplained fire in the baby's nursery. I asked if it couldn't have been repaired, and her exact words were, "We had to get out." That was all. The entity didn't like babies either, it seems. I was with my father at a hospice facility earlier this year. I had been with him earlier in the day and was settling into my nighttime routine when I got the call that he was showing signs that he was on his way. I and my daughter came to sit with him. She took the first shift while I rested in the recliner. Early the next morning, maybe at 1 or 2 a.m., I sat with him while she rested on a daybed in the room. The recliner was empty. Now one thing you need to know about my father is that he had died before. When he was a boy, he had appendicitis. At the time, He was living on an island, so they had to load him into a boat and get him to the mainland to a very small rural hospital, which took a couple hours. He died while in surgery. The way he remembered it and described it to me was that he was floating above himself watching everything. He said he was sad that he was dead. The nurse was handing a scalpel to the doctor when it dropped to the floor, and the doctor was yelling at her. The next thing he remembered was waking up on the recovery ward. It was confirmed later by his mother that we almost lost you. And it was confirmed that the doctor was yelling at the nurse. Now back to the story. I was sitting beside his bed and could see the empty recliner very clearly. About an hour before he died, I kept seeing him sitting in the recliner watching me watching him in bed. I talked to him. I reminded him that this experience was not unfamiliar to him. That he got that second chance and he had lived a good, full life. He died peacefully just before 5 a.m., and the recliner was empty again. Possible demon/devil sighting? Hi all. I will start this with saying that this did not happen to me, but it happened to my boss. I asked him today if he had any supernatural stories, and he told me this. I would love to know what you guys think. He was around 10 to 14 years old. His house is about 200 feet from their family business, with a small field valley in between. The business buildings consist of 2 warehouses and an office. The warehouses are at the edge of the field, and about 100 feet from that is the office. There is a mowed path that is from the house, through the valley, and ends by the end of the warehouse. He mentioned a graveyard being on the property, but he did not specify where. The story. All of the guys that work at the company meet for breakfast around 7 and then go to work at 7:30. His dad decided not to go to breakfast this morning, so one of the guys was supposed to pick him up. It was a foggy/dewy day, so he couldn't see too far ahead of himself. He walked along the path to the warehouse, around the front that faces the office, and near the second warehouse located beside the first one. He was being picked up at the warehouse/office since this worker had a pretty loud truck. My boss waited for a while and was aimlessly walking and kicking rocks when he noticed something weird by the office. Keep in mind, he would have seen this if he looked forward from the path. He tried to focus his vision to figure out what he was seeing. He said that it looked like a big, black figure that appeared to be sitting on an elevated throne. He thought that it was a guy on a lawn chair on top of a trailer. See, that would make more sense since the family business manufactured metal roofing, meaning a trailer would be necessary to pick up the material. After looking at the figure for a while, maybe 5 minutes, he noticed some dogs. 2 dogs suddenly appeared and sniffed the ground, seemingly searching for something. His grandfather had a dog, however, that dog was a yellow lab. Even though he could not remember the color of the dogs, he does not recall them being yellow. After realizing the dogs were there, he booked it. Since he was near the middle of the 2 warehouses and the path was on the other side of these dogs, he ran around the buildings. The grass in this fielded valley is long, so he had to run as fast as he could back to the house through thick, tall grass covered in morning dew. After he made it back to the house, he ran inside, soaked from running in the field, and informed his dad. He said, "Someone's at the office," to which his dad responded in a confused manner, "What?" My boss repeated himself and insisted that he look. When they made their way to the office, nothing was there. Given the foggy and dewy conditions outside, certain areas of the ground should have appeared different. There were no footprints, paw prints, or any other signs of where the guy was supposed to be. Nothing. So, what did he see? My opinion, I told him that I thought it was a sighting of a demon/devil/dark energy. He isn't worried about it, but he never thought of it as being something like that. I mean, come on, a dark figure in a chair with dogs near. Scary. I was getting chills the whole time he was telling me all of this. My eyes were watering, I felt sick, my side was hurting. Like it was scaring the hell out of me. My friend and I may have sensed something malicious and weird driving at night. Okay, this may seem like a bold claim, but I'm willing to make it. To help narrow things down a little, I will say that my friend and I live in the suburban/urban areas near the grassy plains of the not Denver region of Colorado, but I don't feel comfortable specifying exactly where. I'm so sorry if this is convoluted. My best friend and I just had a sleepover, and we felt like going on a night drive. We left my house at 12:31-ish in the morning and went to the gas station first to get some snacks for our drive. After leaving the gas station, I asked if my friend wanted to see the old middle school I used to go to, as we went to different middle schools and then met in high school. They said sure, so I started driving in that direction. When we turned off the road where the gas station was located and onto a main road that would lead to another road near my school, I began to feel uneasy, but I ignored it. I thought it was just dark, the road is poorly lit, and it's under construction. Either way, We got to the intersection between that road and the road I needed to turn down to get to the neighborhood my old school is in, and so we turned right down that road. But as soon as we turned down that road, I felt a horrible, crushing pressure in my chest and a primal urge to leave. I asked my friend if they felt the same way, and they said yes. For a little context, this road had a massive, grassy median sectioning off the two sides of the road, and there were 3 lanes on either side. I genuinely considered flipping a U-turn in the middle of the 3 lanes and just driving the wrong way if we didn't find a spot to turn around as soon as possible. We finally reached the neighborhood entrance, where the feeling of being watched was at its worst for both of us. I turned around and started going like 60 miles per hour down the 35-mile-per-hour road just to get the hell out of there. After we returned home and discussed the experience, I reflected on the feeling I had, and it seemed as though whatever would have happened if we had continued down that road was beyond human control. My friend says that they felt like we were either going to get T-boned, or something was going to hunt and kill us for sport. I agree far more with the latter. It felt like there was something evil in that neighborhood, and it wanted to harm my friend and me just for shits and giggles. We've since gone to sleep, woken up, gotten Wendy's, and had some time to research whatever the hell that could have been. But since we didn't see anything and just felt off, I'm not sure where to start or what it was. We've looked through all of Colorado's more popular cryptids and haven't found anything that could have fit. In addition, neither of us thinks it was something from indigenous folklore. I'm not comfortable saying the names of the specific entities on here out of respect, but you can guess. Additionally, this incident occurred in a suburban area adjacent to the grassy plains outside our city. If any of these additional details are helpful, the entity we encountered felt relatively young compared to other supernatural or inhuman beings. It seemed as though the entity had never been human and was purely evil, driven by an overwhelming bloodlust. Again, this is probably a shot in the dark, but if anybody could provide any sort of context or help, I would appreciate it big time. Thank you so much for listening to this if you've gotten this far. I know it's long and convoluted. Any help is appreciated. Need help identifying a ghost or supernatural being? We are house sitting in the Peoria Midwest area in a neighborhood built in the 1970s and 1980s. It was woods on a bluff before. We have been seeing something that I have only seen something similar to once while camping in the woods. It is tall, 6'5"-ish, solid black, and thin-bodied with slouched shoulders. Its arms go down toward the shins, and it has a long, almost cylindrical head. The tingling on my head I get from ghosts is crazy when they're around. The rooms will smell like rotten eggs individually. The dog gets terrified, and the cat looks up toward the aura of energy when the feeling is strong. It stays a distance away. It is gone in the day, and after 11 p.m., it starts getting an energetic feeling in the house. It almost patrols from upstairs to the kitchen and then to our doorway, with the worst around 3 a.m. Some things that have happened with it. It seems to like the youngest boy's room. The door on top of his fish tank has been opened multiple times. I heard a plastic clank last night, and I think it was this. Last night I heard a static-like ring, as if the radio was on a bad station and the station was putting out a ringing. The energy was crazy in the doorway, and the cat was wide-eyed. I notice a change in the light concentration within the doorway when there is a significant amount of energy present. I have not heard any footsteps. No grunts or voices. The only thing it has seemed to mess with has been the goldfish lid, but otherwise it just watches. Reminds me of a predator cat watching from the distance. My significant other saw the creature walk across the doorway from the other room, and it moved like a Sasquatch, with long strides and its arms swinging back and forth. The land we are in is a new neighborhood on a bluff overlooking the river. All houses are made by the same company. The Illini Confederation, especially the Kaskaskia tribe, was in the area and had fought with the British and the US. Please, if anyone has any ideas and suggestions or warnings. I have thought about trying to take a pic, but I was afraid with the unique, possibly Native American roots to anger it. The man in the corner. My family's home wasn't very old. At the point my parents purchased it, it was probably only 20 to 30 years old. The neighborhood itself was very old, however, and heavily wooded. There were no street lights or sidewalks, and across the street from the house was a patch of forest. When the sun went down, it got very dark and felt suffocating. My younger childhood years were quiet. I had a lot of nightmares as a child, though, and now that I'm older I often wonder if maybe I had more than usual. When I got older and into my preteen years, I started feeling like I was being watched. The house has beautiful large windows that during the day let in a ton of warm sunshine. But at night, they make you feel like you're on display. I was constantly looking over my shoulder everywhere I went in that house. The shadows in the corners of the room felt eerie. A part of my mind always wondered if they held more than just darkened space. My eyes would flicker toward them, trying to remain calm if something appeared. One night, he finally did. I had heard him before I saw him. Back in the day, we only had one computer in the house. I was on that computer after school when I heard a deep voice call out to me. "Hello." I was frozen. I looked around foolishly even though I knew I was alone in the room. There was no one outside, no television on. I didn't have a cell phone yet, they were just starting to gain popularity, so there was no logical source to the sound. I skittered out of the room and to my mom in the kitchen to tell her what happened. What I'll never understand was her dismissal of it. Later on, she'll confess to me to seeing two other ghosts besides the man, but for whatever reason, she decided to brush aside my comment. Until she heard him herself, that is. I'm not sure how much later it was that I saw him. It could have been days or weeks, the years have blurred that detail. But what remained sharp is the image of him, standing behind me, watching. I was on the same computer, in the same spot, when I heard him speak. It was late at night this time, and the feeling of eyes on my skin was making me feel squirmy. I was looking over my shoulder every few minutes, seeking that constant reassurance that yes, I'm still alone. The reprieve would only last minutes until that unshakable sensation would creep back and twist the pit of my stomach. So, again, I turned and glanced behind my shoulder, but this time I was not alone. He was standing in the back corner facing me. The first thing I noticed was how big he was. He was enormous. He was tall and morbidly obese, with his large frame taking over the entire corner of the room behind me. I don't know how to describe it, but I could still see the wall behind him. It was like looking through a window. You can see that the window is there physically, but you can still see beyond it. I could see that he was balding and had a larger nose and a round face, but I could still see the wooden paneling behind him. He made no movements, no adjustments, and no sign that he was acknowledging my learning of his presence. I froze for half a heartbeat, taking him in, and then turned right back around. The only thing I could think to do was pretend that I didn't see him. I slowly turned off the computer, gathered my things, and turned around to head up to my room. He was gone, but the terror remained. I calmly walked upstairs and locked myself in my room. He didn't make his presence known again until a few years ago. In the meantime, the feeling of being watched remained a constant. I never saw the two other ghosts in my house physically, but I heard them. My mother and our babysitter, though, saw them both. They were two little girls. I was the first one home in the afternoon. My middle school was down the street, so it only took me minutes to walk home after school let out. I walked into the house and had only shrugged off my book bag when I heard the laughter. The light giggling bounced off the walls and echoed throughout the entire house. I felt surrounded and couldn't find the source. My heart leapt into my throat and lodged itself there. I did the only thing I could think to do. Get out of our house. I screamed and ran out the door. I had to wait until my sister drove home from the high school before I re-entered. I never heard from them again. They were on a loop, stuck forever doing the same actions without knowledge of their influence on our lives. My mom and babysitter confessed to seeing the exact same thing. I don't know why I only heard them, but I'm very glad I didn't see them as well. My mom was watering plants on the windowsill, keeping an eye on the reflections behind her to make sure I and my sister didn't try sneaking into the kitchen without her knowing. It was when she and I were still young children and couldn't be trusted alone in the kitchen safely. My mom heard us thunder down the stairs and watched in the reflection as we walked from the stairs, turned the corner, and wandered into the kitchen. She turned to stop us, calling out to the two of us, but found the kitchen empty. My sister and I were upstairs still, playing in our room. Our babysitter claimed to have the exact same experience. I was the only one who experienced something different. The very last substantial experience was when our cat died a few years ago. She was 20 years old and the queen of the household. She passed peacefully at home, with our whole family returned to the house to say our goodbyes. My parents escaped upstairs to sit alone, while my sisters and I remained downstairs. The house was quiet except for the occasional sniffle, until the man appeared again. His voice broke up the gloom, and he inserted himself in our otherwise very private moment. I can't recall his exact words, but his voice was unmistakable. We all jumped, and my father, the only man in the house at the time, called out to ask who was there. My parents never believed me about the ghosts in the house, even my mother denied it despite her experiences, but they believe me now. I saw a demon, possibly. This story isn't fake, and I'm not a creative writer. So when I was 10 years old, we moved into a new house. At that time, my mother began to show signs of mental illness, marking the start of her descent into insanity. So apparently she was doing some rituals when my dad wasn't home, that's what he told me. But yeah, so this incident happened at night. I went downstairs to get juice from the kitchen. I walked into the kitchen and saw a pale girl wearing a white dress and having black void-like eyes, but that was all I could make out. She didn't speak to me, but I was frozen there. I then started walking forward, and it backed up, so I followed it, and it walked backwards into my bathroom. I slowly closed the door, it is still staring at me. I then turn around, and when I'm across the kitchen island away from the bathroom, the door shoots open, and its head flies out, coming at me, and I run upstairs, and that's the last I remember of that night. My sister said years later I didn't run upstairs, but I walked slowly upstairs, face white as a sheet of paper, saying I saw a ghost. I don't remember this at all, this is her memory. So I'm aware that this happened and is not an imagination thing. Also, I had a panic attack writing this, so I'd quit that means. I'm curious, was that an actual demon or a hallucination? But after that night, only one other incident occurred. My dad felt a cold hand grab him while going up the stairs to his room. Nothing much after. So was it a demon? Was it a hallucination? Was it an intruder? I'd love an explanation. My supernatural experience. I was 11 years old, and my family had just moved into a duplex in the suburbs. My bed was small, low to the ground, and pushed against the wall. At the end there was a low window with the blinds down. The sun had gone down, but it was still fairly early in the evening. I would estimate it was around 8 o'clock, which means it was likely cold outside, as this time of year typically sees the sun set early enough for it to be completely dark by 8. I got up off my bed and walked to the end of my bedroom. The lights were on, so I could see everything clearly. I am facing the direction of my bed, looking directly towards the window, when an arm reached out from under my bed and smacked the blinds. They even shook. The arm only showed from elbow to hand. It was wearing a blue denim-ish long-sleeved dress shirt, and the hand had a green tint. It was obviously a man's hand. I shut my bedroom door and went to the furthest point in my room away from the bed and slowly bent down to peek underneath. Nothing. I've looked online for similar stories, and others have had the same, or near the same, thing happen at nearly the same age. It shows itself from the elbow to the hand, appears frantic, then retreats. One investigator from a forum I visited claimed that it could be a demonic test for children. It may seem isolated at first, but it has the potential to resurface in a more aggressive manner later in life. As a child who searched my room after the incident without much fear, I still wonder when and if this thing will reappear. Also, I'll add that I am a very logical thinker. I wear my old basic training prescription glasses, the huge ones, whenever I lose my normal glasses. These glasses serve as a good backup for my moderately high prescription, as it would be challenging to have no vision at all. Sometimes, I see what looks like shadows darting across my peripheral vision, especially at night, but I attribute these to reflections in the lenses. Also, if I wake up and see anything, like a figure in my bedroom, I'll blink a couple times, or I'll get up and approach it. If the shadow disappears, or I identify it as something else from my bed, I will dismiss it. After discovering this channel and listening to people's stories, I have concluded that some individuals might believe I have genuinely encountered the Hat Man. However, as I mentioned earlier, if the experience is not clear to me and I cannot objectively dismiss it as a mind trick, for example, if I just woke up and something was casting a strange shadow, or if I am unable to blink or get up to see that it has disappeared, then I attribute it to my tired mind playing tricks on me. This was the only time in my life that I saw something in my bedroom that I couldn't explain, but you and I both understood. It was as real as another person physically in the room with me. We moved to a lake house in the woods last year. I mean deep woods. From our side doors, garage, or patio, you can walk for 3 miles in old-growth forest. Feels like Fangern. So, last November I was up at my usual 3 a.m., thanks, menopause, made my coffee, and went out to the deck to do my neat daily puzzles. I can last 30 minutes or so at that time of year before I go back in due to the chill. The nights are very quiet and completely dark, and you can see all the stars. And northern lights once in a while. We're set back about 60 from the Lake Michigan shoreline. It's 350 feet deep, only 200 out from the shore. Big drop off. About 30 minutes in, I suddenly put the phone down and whip my head around to my 4 o'clock, as I've never done before, and see a single white/silver orb about 2 to 3 inches in diameter sitting mostly still but bobbing very slightly, about 25 feet from me, just a few feet from the tree line. It was about 8 to 10 feet above the ground. My thought, which makes no sense, was that it was a light on the helmet of a man standing in the dark, staring at me. I felt it. People, I am a 60-year-old lady who loves to bake. Draw what you can from that. I have never once in my life hit a person and am not a battle strategist. But I felt the overwhelming urge to fight this thing. It was crazy. I put my phone on the outdoor table and started to get out of the chair. I'd been sitting for a bit, so I had to grab the armrests and push up, and I turned to look at it while I did. As I rose, the orb began to move away from me back into the woods. It traveled in a completely straight line. Impossibly straight given the thick branches at that height. It moved about 20 miles per hour or so. I could see it recede for a bit until I lost it in the trees. It headed to Lake Michigan. Last weird thing, as soon as I saw it disappear into the trees, I sat back down and finished puzzles. It was like I forgot about it immediately afterward. I went from thinking I had to physically fight off an intruder, lol for me, to just doing the spelling bee. Later I returned to bed, as usual. About an hour later, I finally realized the situation. I don't go out as much in the wee hours anymore. But I also just moved on. You can't let weird stuff change your routines too much. You have to live your life. I think I met a supernatural being in New Orleans. A few years ago in New Orleans, I had an encounter with a being that could have been a person, angel, demon, parallel universe inhabitant, or alien. It's a moment that I simply can't get out of my head, but I haven't been ready to talk about it because the entirety of the experience sounds crazy, and I'm generally a rational human being. This is a throwaway account for obvious reasons. No one in my circle of family or friends knows what I went through in the first 4 years of my relationship, and I'd prefer to keep it that way. I'm hoping someone can identify what exactly happened and perhaps talk me out of believing that this was a supernatural experience. A few years ago, my husband and I were on our honeymoon. While things are fantastic now, they haven't always been. My husband had a lot of emotional baggage from his youth, as did I. While I tend to internalize things, my husband is the opposite and was often taking his anger out on me. He was an alcoholic, cheated on me, did more than a few things to break my trust, was emotionally unpleasant, and was part of the reason I spiraled into a deep depression. While I probably should have left him instead of marrying him at the time, I'm glad I didn't. He's worked on himself significantly, and although he does lose his temper every now and then, it's no longer directed at me. He's not a villain. The backstory is to allow you to understand why I still question to this day what happened. It was our second or third day in the city. We were starting our day, walking from the Marigny to the French Quarter. I decided to go into a few stores while my husband smoked a cigarette and waited for me. As I came out to meet him, he was talking to a very tall man with long straw blonde hair in his mid-40s or so with a dog on the edge of the sidewalk while he leaned against the storefront. I love talking to people, so as I joined him, I invited him to come on into my bubble, because I say weird things like that. This was my first inkling that something was off. He looked at me intensely and said to me, "Don't ever say that. You never know what you're inviting over." And came closer all the same. The rest of the conversation was weird, to say the least. It was not quite esoteric in nature, but it felt like the things he was saying could be either brushed off as a crazy man in need of medication or that he was a soldier that had lived a rough life. I don't specifically recall his exact words, but I remember that they seemed unusual. At some point he asked me if I knew what I was wearing around my neck. Naturally, I replied, "Yes, it's the tree of life. I made it." I can't remember the details or exactly what he said, but after this he looked at me and then looked at my husband and said to me, "Why are you here?" I replied that it was our honeymoon and that we were married. I remember feeling the weight of those words on my chest at that moment. I remembered the heartbreak and everything that had transpired in our relationship, and we shared a moment where it was as if he read my mind and knew. He gave me a look of what I can only describe as empathy or sympathy. He looked at me and said, You're full of light. Your heart is full of light." He turned to my husband. "But your heart is darkness." He turned back to me at that point and said, so only I could hear, "Do you want me to swap some of that out so things are more balanced?" He looked at me intensely. Like this was a heavily weighted question with consequences. I'm not sure what compelled me to do so, but I nodded yes. At that point, he touched both of us in the spot of our third eye and told me it was done. I looked him directly in the eyes, face to face for the first time since we started to talk. He was at least 6 feet 5 inches, so I had to crane my neck up to look at him. It was then that I realized how strange they were. His pupils were red. Red. Not black or reflecting light or anything. They were bright red. The color of the iris was like mine, blue with spots of brown, which is not very common. I said to him, "Hey. Your eye color, it's the same as mine." Not brave enough to ask about the pupils. He looked genuinely surprised that I was able to notice his eyes. It was like he pondered this for a moment and then shrugged as he said to me the weirdest thing. "Maybe you're a descendant." As he walked away with his dog, he yelled, "By the way, I never wash my hands." As he laughed. Here's the thing, for the rest of the day and well into the evening, we both felt a tingling sensation all over our bodies. Like, not quite an itch, but it was like something starting from the spot he touched us and working its way down our body until it was at our feet and then left. I kid you not, about a week later, things slowly started improving with our relationship. While I don't doubt that it's mostly because of my husband's effort for change, part of me wonders if the catalyst wasn't that moment in New Orleans. The funny thing is, my husband doesn't remember any of the weird stuff. He remembers the homeless guy and that he was weird, but he doesn't remember any of the spiritual stuff he said to me or the color of his eyes or anything. Not even how tall and imposing he was. I mean, the dude looked like a Viking. Who exactly did I meet? Okay, so it's a long story, but I was pulled from the ER to our branch urgent care in the old building for the first time during a flu outbreak. I was unaware of the legends surrounding this haunted building. I was unaware of the story about the drunk guy who had been left to sleep it off in the back room of the old ER, only to later choke on his vomit and die. We were so busy that the nurse in charge didn't get around to telling me about it. So the whole shift, things keep happening in this room in the back that make me think I'm forgetting there's a patient in there. So I keep going back to check. The light turns on, and the curtain keeps getting pulled to hide the bed. The bed that I had just made was messed up. And the call light goes on, even though the call light system had been disabled. Completely. We are referring to a situation where the call light was completely disconnected from both the central system and the electricity. I didn't know that at the time, this call bell just kept going off. I thought I was being pranked, and I was pretty pissed off about it because it was hella busy, and I was already running around like a chicken with my head cut off. So I called the nurse in charge out on it. I informed her that I had closed the room in the back after the last discharge and that we would no longer be placing anyone in it, so no one could continue making me run back there unnecessarily, as they had all night. Her answer was just, "Oh, you don't know," and she tells me the story of the guy who died back there. Almost predictably, the call light went off. I rushed back there, furious, and certain I was going to catch whoever was doing it this time. But the room was empty again. The curtain was pulled out when I had fixed it to the wall. And the bed I had made not 2 minutes ago was all messed up again. I was exasperated. I went into that room, stood in the middle of it, and stomped my foot, demanding out loud that the ghost stop doing all this shit to get my attention. So here I am, standing in a room that's supposedly haunted, basically reading the riot act to someone who isn't there. Suddenly, a wave of calmness washes over me, completely dispelling all anger and frustration. What replaced that anger and frustration was a desperate pleading, "Please, don't let that ever happen to anybody again." It was more than sadness. It wasn't guilt, either. It was more a sincere feeling of how awful that was to have happened to someone, how terrible and lonely it must have been to feel forgotten to the point that he died, and a plea to please make sure to never let it happen again. I said, "Look, I'm really sorry that happened to you. But I promise that I won't ever let anybody forget someone back here. I promise, I'll keep checking on them, just like I kept coming back here and checking on you tonight." When I turned to leave, the charge nurse was standing there and said, "You're not scared?" I told her no, because I believe that ghosts can't hurt or kill people, so I think there's nothing to be afraid of if there is a ghost. She said, "Good, I'll request you to float here from now on, and if you're here when he's upstairs, then you can go tell him to cut it out up there, too." It appears he enjoyed swiveling the chairs there, which unsettled the labor and delivery nurses. After we left, the light stayed off, the curtain remained closed, the bed stayed unmade, and the call light stayed silent. I got pulled to that urgent care probably once a week after that, and I made a habit of going back and saying hi every time I did, to let the ghost know that I didn't forget about him. I never felt that emotional feeling after that. I felt guilty that he was forgotten back there and kind of angry that there were nurses who were so lazy that they didn't go check on a guy who was sleeping back there. But I never felt the way I did that night. I think once he got through to you how awful it felt to die alone back there and you got it, I think he stopped trying to get that across to you. I mean, I'm emo, but you figure if that was just me being emo, I'd feel like that every time. But no. I felt more guilty and embarrassed on behalf of my entire profession. I encountered nurses who, if they didn't have to check on you, would simply leave you to choke and die in your vomit. I worked with people like that, so the overall impact of this incident was that I shortly thereafter stopped nursing altogether. In 2017, 5 friends and I took a trip to Tybee Island. It was about midnight, and we were on the beach. One of our friends, we'll call her Sarah, was acting very strange, and the atmosphere was electric. Something felt very off. Apart from the million stars and moonlight illuminating the ocean, it was completely dark. All of a sudden, one friend points to the sky and says, "You guys, what is that?" And I cannot begin to explain what we saw in a coherent manner. It was a massive, creature-looking thing with active camouflage, an invisibility cloak effect. It looked like it was about 150 to 200 feet above. It had a massive wingspan and tendril-looking things hanging off and flew over us. The atmosphere felt so crazy, like nothing was safe and the laws of nature could implode on themselves at any second. It felt like there was no atmospheric pressure to hold my very cells together, like I might just disintegrate into the air. I'm spiritual and not religious, but I am convinced that that night, the veil between worlds was lifted. Anyways, it flies over, and then of course we're all freaking out. We each took a turn saying what we thought it was. All of us but Sarah said we thought it was some kind of spiritual being. But Sarah said it was a dragon. I'd why? And we all get reflective about the experience. Then someone turns on their phone flashlight, and Sarah is gone. She was just present a couple minutes prior. She vanished without noise and without warning, so we started screaming her name. We're causing such a commotion that other people down the beach are telling us to shut up. But it's pitch black, and our friend is just gone without a trace. And the scary thing is, Sarah was going through a dark time in life, and we were worried. We all looked out to the ocean, and I know we simultaneously saw the same image in our heads, Sarah walking into the water silently to not return. I cannot tell you how clear the vision was in all of our heads. We looked at each other and knew. I was genuinely wondering what we were going to tell Sarah's mom. So this transpires in all of 5 minutes, and we're just losing our minds. And suddenly we get a phone call from Sarah, and we answer it. Her voice is flat, and we're like, "Where are you?" And she calmly says, "I'm at the car." The car is a 20-minute jog away. In daylight. How did she get there in 5 minutes? This isn't Sarah's hometown, and it's an unfamiliar area in pitch black. Anyways, Sarah pulls up the car for us, and when she gets there, we look at her and demand to know why she just up and left and tell her we were terrified and worried. She turned her head 90 degrees to my friend in the passenger seat and, deadpan, just said, "I don't know what you're talking about." We went back to the house, and Sarah didn't say a word to us and just went to bed. We stay up trying to figure out what in the world happened. We're making up theories and conspiracies, going spiritual and sci-fi routes. One of us makes a comment that we need to ask Sarah again what she experienced, and then we hear footsteps come down the hall from the bedroom. It's Sarah, no one else is home. We can see her shadow under the door as she stops there but doesn't knock or try to come in. She stays a minute, turns around, and goes back to bed. It was the craziest shit that ever happened to me. I have never asked Sarah about it, but I do, at least once a year, bring it up to 2 of my friends who were there because I need to know it wasn't a dream. And each time they're like, "Yeah." I still have no idea what happened. Supernatural hatchet. This story takes place in the suburbs of Northern California. During one sunny afternoon, my cousins and I were watching television in their living room, which has the backyard sliding door attached to it. I was 12, and my oldest cousin was 15 years old. They raised a few chickens in the backyard and would sometimes let them roam freely, which was the case at that moment. As we watched television, there was a clear disturbance to the chickens as we heard the flock cackle and their wings flapping. One chicken somehow miraculously made it over the fence. Now it was mine and my cousin's job as the oldest there to climb the fence into the neighbor's backyard and retrieve the darn chicken. As we stepped outside, that is when we heard it. The steady sound of something slamming against wood. At first we ignored it because we made it a priority to rescue that chicken. Coincidence or not, the sun was now enveloped in gray, painting the sky the same color. It started to drizzle, and the sound of chopping wood became more apparent. We were curious and looked at each other because the sound seemed to come from the backyard. Confused because all the adults were out and no one should be outside, we made the grand decision to investigate. It was easy to pinpoint the source of the sound, the right side of the house, home to the trash bins and other extraneous items. As we peered into that narrow stretch of space in the backyard, the fight or flight mechanism instantly activated in us. I want to emphasize both. We both saw a hatchet with an iron head and wooden handle literally in midair striking at a pile of logs. The piercing fear and disbelief turned us into statues for about 5 seconds, and in those 5 seconds, we clearly saw the hatchet motion 2 or 3 more times striking at the wood with no wielder. When the adrenaline and fear subsided, we chose flight and dashed to the sliding door. More than a decade has passed since that incident, and to this day, we still do not know if there is any biological, physical, or psychological explanation for it. However, I do know that whenever family gatherings occur and the topic of the supernatural arises, my cousin and I always instantly lock eyes and nod at each other. I have only ever experienced one supernatural incident in my life, but some of my unlucky relatives, including my own older brother, have a keen sense of the paranormal. According to them, That house was haunted because they have had several occasions of seeing spirits and hearing things. Unbelievably, my cousin and I can vividly recall the exact events we witnessed that day. Thanks for listening. The first experience I've ever had. This is a story that really happened to me when I was younger. I tell it to people sometimes because it was the first time in my life that I ever experienced something truly supernatural. Some people don't believe me, but this truly is the realest thing that ever happened to me. It's been stuck in my head ever since. Every time I think about it, it's just as clear as the night it happened. When I was in elementary school, I lived in a renovated farmhouse in Maryland. It was a Sunday night, and I had school the next day. My friend was over, and we were watching YouTube on the computer. It started getting late, so my dad told him to head home so I could get some sleep. I didn't know it yet, but there was no way I was getting any sleep that night. I was wired, so full of energy and adrenaline that no matter how much I lay there in the dark, I just couldn't relax. My bedroom door was closed, my dad was upstairs asleep, and my brother was across the hall in his room. I remember thinking about how awake I was and how much energy I had. A few minutes went by. And then I noticed something strange. There was this pressure on my legs. Like two hands leaning down on me. We didn't have any pets at the time, so I had no idea what it could have been. At first, I brushed it off. But then it started moving. Slowly. The weight shifted upward, pressing harder with each inch it moved, until it reached my torso. By then, I was freaking out inside. My brain was scrambling for answers. I wiggled my fingers and moved my arms a little to make sure I wasn't in sleep paralysis. I wasn't. I was wide awake. The pressure kept going until it reached my head. I turned my face to the side, eyes shut, telling myself it wasn't real. But then I heard it. At first, it was faint, static, like someone dragging their fingers across the screen of an old box TV. Then it changed. The sound warped into a scream. Not a normal scream, a man's voice, tortured, inhuman, echoing in a way I can't explain. It wasn't coming from my room. It was right next to my ear. No, inside my head. It felt like it lasted for minutes, and all I could do was lie there, frozen. When it finally stopped, I tried moving again, just to make sure I was really awake. I was. And I told myself, if anything else happens, I'm getting out of here. And then it happened. The same pressure slammed down on me again. Only heavier this time. I didn't hesitate. I jumped out of bed, ran straight into my brother's room, and burst into tears. He told me I was dreaming. That ghosts weren't real. We checked my room and the rest of the house. Nothing. My dad didn't believe me either. Everyone thought I was lying. But I know what I felt. It messed me up so badly that for 6 months, I slept with a pillow over my head, hoping it would block out the sound if it ever came back. Since then, I've had other supernatural experiences. Enough that they don't even scare me anymore. But as life got busier with family, work, and responsibilities, the encounter stopped. Even when I've gone looking, I haven't found anything. Still, I'll never forget what happened that night. I know it was real. My boyfriend and I were helping his dad go through his many belongings. In the basement, there was a vintage mirror that I fell in love with. His dad didn't want it, so my BF and I took it home. It was a full-body, flippable mirror. His dad had no idea where it came from. I set it up near the wardrobe in our bedroom. We both had nightmares the first night having it. When we awoke in the morning, one of the wardrobe doors was wide open. This was unusual because I always make sure to close the wardrobe up before bed because it makes me uncomfortable having it open. This kept happening every day, and my BF and I were equally confused and were starting to get a bit spooked. The nightmares continued as well. My nightmares were so violent and terrifying that I'd be woken up from the fear. Every single time I woke up, I'd be facing the mirror. We started flipping it before bed so that it faced the wall. We'd wake up with the mirror flipped back around, facing us. One night I woke up from a nightmare, facing the mirror. I turned over to face my boyfriend, and he was sitting upright on the end of the bed. I asked him what he was doing. As I awaited a response, I sat myself up and accidentally put my hand down on his arm. He was lying in bed next to me, fast asleep. Something was sitting at the end of the bed that looked exactly like him. I watched, frozen in fear as it stood up. It slowly walked from the end of the bed to the wardrobe and vanished before my eyes. I finally regained control and shook my BF awake. We both agreed to get rid of the mirror. We took it outdoors the next afternoon, broke it apart, and burned it in the fire pit. We went to bed that night and had peaceful sleeps. We woke up to a closed wardrobe as well. My family's personal crazy supernatural stories. I suppose if we're starting with me, we'll start with when I was in the womb. My maternal grandmother died of cancer while my mom was pregnant with me. She died in October, I was born in January. One day, my mom was talking with her mom early on in her pregnancy about how she was sad that she wouldn't get to meet me because they knew she would be dying soon. When my mom said this, her mom told her, "Oh Shauna, I'll get to meet her before you do." My mom didn't know if I was a boy or girl at the time, but she was so sure I was a girl. I guess it was only a 50-50 guess, but the weird part is I feel like I have met her. I can hear her voice and see her and her mannerisms in my mind but have no specific memories. Now on to my daughter. She's 5. When she was 2, my aunt, who I was very close with and was my mom's best friend, died. We went to visit my aunt before she died, but she was in the hospital and too sick for my daughter to see her, as my aunt didn't want to scare her. My aunt lived in Texas, and we live in Oklahoma, so before she died, she had only met my daughter once before, when she was a baby. After she died, my daughter was in bed with my mom one night. My mom has pictures of all her family on her walls, and my daughter was asking, "And who's that?" And my mom would tell her, "That's my mom." So on and so forth. Towards the end of this, my daughter said, "And that's Sherry, my aunt's name," and pointed at my mom's empty doorway, where there was no picture, smiled, and waved. It appeared as though my aunt was standing there, waving. Even if there were a picture of my aunt, my daughter wouldn't recognize her or know her by name. A few weeks after this, she was playing alone in her room. I was passing by and asked, "Are you okay playing alone in there?" She casually replied, "I'm not alone, Sherry's playing with me." To my daughter, it appeared as though Sherry had never passed away. She doesn't ever ask about her death or anything. It's just like any other relative that comes to see her sometimes. On a less wholesome note, she has seen something a little more sinister. For a while she wouldn't bathe alone and would freak out if I left the bathroom while I was in there and would say, because that hand tried to get me in there with it while I still had my dress on, so I guess she saw some creepy hand while she was about to get in the bath one day? I'm not sure. Another night she got up to go to the bathroom and came running, screaming, back into my room, saying she saw a man standing there. She would only describe it as a dark man with a piece of his body missing. And one time I asked how she knew it was a man if it was just dark, thinking maybe she just saw a shadow that scared her, and she said, because he had short hair. So now she refuses to walk around the house at night. I have a lot more stories from different family members, but I'll end it with this one. My mom adopted my nephew when he was a newborn, and we lived with my brother and his son for a while, so there were my 2 nephews right at the same age, younger than 10. In my brother's house, there was definite ominous energy, especially toward the back of the house, where our room and bathroom were. Both of my nephews were terrified of this same entity. One of my nephews referred to it as Smiley Guy and described it as a brown creature with many sharp teeth, while the younger one said it resembled the Grinch. It's unclear what exactly they perceived, but they both reported seeing it in the bathroom and closet. One of them, who was years into potty training and had not had an accident in a long time, peed his pants because he was too scared to go into the bathroom alone. So I guess my family possesses an equal ability to see both deceased family members and some really scary things. The Whistler. Hello, I'm not really sure how to start this story or how to explain it, but I will try my best. I am a 19F, and I've lived in the same house since I was around a year old, on the outskirts of a small farm town in Canada. My family has experienced various supernatural events, but I want to focus on the one ongoing experience that bothers me the most and seek clarification about it. I am a middle child, and I have 3 siblings. My siblings include my older sister, who is 10 years old, my older brother, who is 7 years older, and my younger sister, who is 6 years younger. When I was younger, around 4 years old, I kept having strange experiences in our house. For context, we live in an area that has lots of indigenous and war history. My bedroom was in the basement when I was a kid. Nobody likes the basement, it's unsettling and creepy even though it doesn't look creepy. There is the old laundry room, which is the only unfinished part, and as a child I was terrified of it. My playroom was outside of it, and I would always keep the door to it shut. I used to hear someone in there, a man, that would talk to me. I'd have conversations through the door and freak out my mother and siblings. I'd call him John, and I don't really remember the conversations, just that they happened. That was the first weird occurrence. Around that time, I was playing in my bedroom, which faced the side of the stairs to the basement, but a wall blocked the side, so I could only see if someone was on the last step from my room. I was playing with my dolls in my room when I got the sense that someone was watching me, so I turned around. I saw someone peering around the wall sideways. I could only see their wide, piercing eyes, dark hair, and thick, dark eyebrows, as well as their hands holding onto the wall. My brother had similar features, so I angrily told him to stop and stormed upstairs to tell my mom to get him to stop trying to scare me. She told me to go back to playing and she would deal with it, and I did that. Years later, my mom told me that my brother had never left his room, so it couldn't have been him. His room was on the top floor, and the living room where my mom was sitting was on the main floor. In order to get down to the basement, he would have had to pass her. To this day he swears it was not him. I still remember the experience vividly, and it was extremely unsettling and almost sinister. Around a year or two after that, my older sister heard whistling and footsteps on the porch below her bedroom window. She was on the top floor, across from my brother. This is now my room. It was winter time, and so my dad went outside to check, and sure enough, there were footprints in the snow. The police said there was nothing that could be done but suggested putting up cameras, as we have a large property. The whistling continued into the summer, when my parents and I went camping, while my two older siblings stayed home. They were taking out the garbage cans one night when they noticed a dark figure hiding behind the neighbor's cans, watching them. My brother noticed it first and asked my sister if she saw it, and she just told him to run. We still do not know who or what that was. We don't have many neighbors, and this particular neighbor was an old man who was asleep at the time. My brother is very into the supernatural, and as a teen he was playing with a Ouija board in his room. Whoever he was talking to told him that they have been in my mom's life since she was 12 years old. My brother did not tell her about this and instead asked her when she first started using Ouija. She said she was 12. I know that Ouija boards are a touchy subject and not very reliable, but I feel that they can provide relevant information. Around this time, my younger sister was around 3, and she woke up screaming about the devil in our shared room. She refused to sleep in there for weeks. That same night, my brother returned home from his friend's house after a distressing experience with the Ouija board, during which a spirit claimed to have ended itself, causing the air to turn cold and everyone using the board to feel nauseous and distraught. He admitted this to me, and ever since that night he would regularly wake up with strange marks and scratches on his body. No, it could not have been the cats, as he slept with his door closed, and they were declawed. My older sister woke up to a man watching her sleep at the end of her bed with a potato head. She thought it was our father and asked what he was doing in there. The figure turned and walked out. My father did not go into her room that night. Last summer, I was home alone with my girlfriend. During the summer, my family goes camping, and I am usually home alone, aside from my cat. It was around 10 p.m., and my girlfriend was upstairs in my room while I was in the main floor bathroom getting ready to shower. I was by the window, which is pretty much on the porch, grabbing a towel from the cupboard when I heard the whistling. It was clearly a male voice, but the whistling was a sort of song I had never heard before. It was very pretty and almost tempting. It stopped after about 10 seconds. I thought I was imagining the sound, so I moved closer to the window to listen, and it started again, this time closer to me. I bolted upstairs and told my girlfriend, who had no idea of the past history with the whistling. I called my parents, and my dad sent my neighbor from down the road to come check the property, and he drove out from the campground to check. There was nothing. The motion lights we had added were not triggered. The cameras, which were facing the area in front of the window, captured nothing. I was horrified. It was my first time hearing the whistling. I talked to my sister, and it was the same as she had heard. This would be around 10 years since she had experienced this. My mother told me yesterday that she first started hearing the whistling as a teen. I had no idea about this. She first heard it in a very stressful situation while she was hiding in the bathroom at her old apartment about 20 minutes from here. She heard it when we first moved into this house, almost 20 years ago. She heard it outside her window when my sister did. Hearing this made my blood chill. My mom has had a hard life and many experiences, but she didn't tell me this one until recently. I have always heard my name being whispered in this house, nowhere else, but I chalked it up to old house noises. This happened as recently as last week. It happened frequently this summer while my family was gone. My mother recently told me she experiences this and has since she was around 12 years old. I have never told anyone about it in fear of sounding crazy. There may be additional details I am overlooking, but ever since my mother mentioned hearing it as a teenager yesterday, I have been feeling anxious and deeply unsettled. I want to know what this is and why it is happening. Is it a Wendigo or a haunting, a demon, or is my family just crazy? I would like any possible insight or commentary, please. I was working as a photographer at a summer camp, and I would stay up late at night editing my photos in the office. One night my boss told me that a guest had injured their leg and they needed to drive them to the hospital. My boss was staying in a platform tent on top of a wooded hill and asked if I could go stay in the tent with her kids, who were sleeping, until they returned from the hospital. No problem. I get to the tent, lie down on a bunk bed, and try to get some rest. A couple hours later I see a light coming up the hill and think it is my boss returning from the hospital. But something about the light seemed off. It didn't resemble a normal flashlight. Instead, it was bright white and orb-shaped, not bouncing as a flashlight would when someone walks, and there was no sound of footsteps. The light got to our tent and just kind of sat there, at the top of the entryway, which was probably 6 to 7 feet high. No noise. I thought that was really strange, so I pulled out my flip phone and noticed the time, 12:20 a.m., and shined the light from the phone screen onto the doorway. The light then disappeared. No one was there. I didn't feel threatened or anything and thought maybe I was dreaming. I went back to sleep and then returned to my cabin an hour later when my boss got back. The next day I was telling a coworker about this, and as I was telling her, her eyes got bigger, and she said, "You're joking, right? Tell me you're joking." I asked her why, and she said that she and another staff member were outside the administrative building, about 100 yards from the bottom of the hill I was on, at 12:10 a.m., and they saw a light moving toward them. They yelled at it, asking who it was, since no one should be out that late. The light never responded to their yells, it just kept moving closer and closer to them. So they ran inside the admin building to hide. 10 minutes later they noticed it was gone. Which is when I saw it at 10:20 a.m. When she told me this, I realized that the light didn't approach from the front of the tent on the trail but from the back of the tent, which was facing a very steep hill with tons of fallen trees, thick blackberry bushes, stinging nettle, and tons of foliage. I tried walking up that side of the hill in the day, and it was hard and dangerous. But that's where this light came up the hill. I still have no idea what the light was. Here's one supernatural experience I have under my belt. There are quite a few I have, including seeing a ghost of an officer in my childhood home. However, I want to talk about one experience that started off on a more sinister note. I am friends with these two sisters I met in middle school. We're all really close and still talk and everything, but this is an experience that included both of them in a ritual we were trying to perform at my house that took a turn for the worse, for me. So we were probably sophomores in high school, and over the years we all had expressed interest in the supernatural / ghosts / demons / hauntings / possessions. I realize now we were being really ducking stupid and we have not tried anything again after this incident, and we had read about how to summon your own incubus / succubus, and being the weird girls we were, severely underestimating how powerful this really was, we decided we would each summon our own incubus. However, at the last minute, I and my older friend, a year apart between her and her sister, backed out, which left her younger sister the only one to perform the ritual. I will leave specific details out to protect anyone wanting to try this, don't. So they came over on a Friday night, her sister did the ritual, and we waited up for a couple of hours to see if it had worked. And after a while we just figured that the ritual we found was fake or just didn't work and went to bed around 12 m/1 am. Now, something happened to the sister that did the ritual that night. I'll just use M as her name here. However, something also did happen to me for months after the initial ritual was done. So she told me at a later point that the night she did it and went to sleep in our spare room at my house, something was crouched down and staring at her from the foot of the bed. She said she really struggled to sleep for the rest of the night, but after that, nothing else happened to her. Which I was so happy about, especially after what happened to me for over a year. So, that night, I hadn't experienced anything out of the ordinary. I didn't experience anything unusual the next day either. However, over the span of a week, I had begun to see this dark shadowy figure. I couldn't make out any distinguishing features. It was just this thing I would see from time to time, mostly at home for the first few months. It would only come as it got darker out and when I was alone. It loved to just watch me from across my living room but dwelled mostly in my bedroom. I would wake up in the middle of the night and see it, and I lost so much sleep because of it. I truly believe it caused my insomnia because there were days when I couldn't sleep, knowing it would always end up in my room if I did. However, it then started to follow me outside of the house. There was one time I saw it in the hallway of my school while I was walking to class. I saw its reflection in a glass window I passed, and I was so terrified. My friends and I knew it had to be M's incubus, possibly looking for her and attached to me since the ritual was done at my house. I don't know. Over time I saw it less and less until I stopped seeing it as I got into my senior year of high school. However, I still have days where I feel something near me, or I'll see something that kind of looks like it. Looking back, it was never really a bad or angry entity, because I don't remember it ever attacking me, but it used to scare me so much when I was younger because it would always follow me and watch me. And like I said, much sleep was lost to it being around all the time. My family's supernatural history, abridged. My family has lived in the same house for several generations. Over the course of our history, we have had numerous sightings and experiences. Here are a couple. It's an old, colonial house built in, I believe, the mid-1600s. My great-grandfather bought it when my grandmother was a kid, and before he bought it, it had been owned by another family since it was built. He decided to do some renovations on it when they moved in. One thing that he decided was to move the staircase from one room to a different room. There was a door at the top of the stairs that was open, and the construction workers needed it closed, so they closed it. However, it reopened immediately. This happened several times. Exasperated, they literally nailed it shut and then took a lunch break. When they came back, it was open again. They left and refused to return. Shortly after moving into the house, my great-grandparents had a daughter. She very unfortunately passed away at only a year and a half from, I believe, sudden infant death syndrome. When I was a baby, around the age she was when she died, my mother would often hear a baby crying, go check on me, and find me sleeping. Fast forward several years, my sister, my niece, also about a year and a half, and I are sitting in the living room. My niece is laughing about something, very happy, when I hear a baby cry from upstairs. I thought I was just hearing things, but I looked at my sister, and she asked me if I heard it, too. When my younger brother was about 2 years old, my mother was a stay-at-home mom, and she was in her bedroom working on something about 40 minutes before I came home from school. I was about 7. My brother was playing in the playroom that was just outside of my mom's room. He was out of sight of my mother, but she could hear him. There was no one else in the house. All of a sudden my brother starts asking my mother who the man in the room is. She called him into her room and didn't move until someone else came home. When she was about 9, she remembers seeing an old man dressed in a plaid shirt in the same room he was in, as do several of my grandmother's siblings when they were young. Also, when my nieces were younger, they used to ask similar questions to my brothers, though one described him as a scary man. I was upstairs by myself one day when I was probably between 10 and 12. I was in my brother's room for some reason, playing with this little Fisher-Price drum he had, and I played a random tune on it. Immediately after I played the tune, I heard the exact melody being played back to me from the attic above. There was no one on the second or the third floor of the house but me. Now, my siblings and I all knew about the presences in our house, and we also knew they weren't malevolent, as they never hurt us. My sister used to ask them, at night, to show themselves to her. One morning she woke up at 1 a.m. and saw the head, only the head, of a man with a black wide-brimmed hat hovering over her. She turned on the light, and he vanished. She told my father about it the next day, and he's not the type of man to believe in these things, but before she described the man to him, he told her he'd seen a man in a black wide-brimmed hat with a black cloak in the playroom. When my mother was growing up, she lived in a different house, but one that was also haunted. There was a third-floor bedroom, and one of the beds in it would often shake for no discernible reason as they were trying to sleep. However, it would stop if you told it to. Except for one night when it drove my tough-as-nails drill sergeant Ann to tears in its refusal. My grandfather had a brother who was struck by lightning and died at about 21. One night, while he and my grandmother were trying to sleep, he sensed a tickling sensation and persistently urged my grandmother to stop. However, she wasn't touching him. She felt that it was my great-uncle in their room that night, just telling my grandfather he was okay. Also, one day, my grandmother was driving with all of her kids in the car when my mom was a kid. She turned down a road that they didn't frequent. My uncle turned to her and said, "I hate coming down this road. I wish we didn't have to go down here." He had never been down the road before. Lightning had struck my great-uncle on this very road. My great-uncle passed away before the birth of my mother's oldest sibling. I experienced something supernatural for the first time. When I was about 8 years old, my mother and father decided we should move houses, as we used to live in a poor housing community, and they wanted to move into a real house instead. After a few months of moving in there and fully settling in, it was anywhere from 7 to 10 p.m. I do not remember the exact time, but since I was still a little kid, I was sleeping in my parents' room. I remember I was eating an apple. After I was done eating the apple, I dropped it, and it went under their bed, and as any normal parent would do, they asked me to pick it up. I hesitated, not because I was unwilling but because something inside me had a bad feeling about doing so. I can't describe the feeling, just that something clicked inside me that didn't feel good about it. They asked me again, so I bent down to reach under their bed. Although I didn't want to peek my head under there, I couldn't reach the apple I dropped. In a moment of hesitation, I peeked under the bed to find the apple, and what I saw staring back at me was probably the most horrific and transparent face I still remember. It was emotionless. It was a very white but transparent face staring right back at me. Every hair on my 8-year-old body stood up in an instant. I got back up without grabbing the apple and started crying in my mother's arms. She asked me what I saw, and I replied, "Ahead." She instantly started yelling my father's name, who was in the other room. He came in running. A little backstory. My father, a full-blooded Native American, has experienced numerous encounters with ghosts, spirits, and supernatural entities. He used to work in a high school that was built on a cemetery as a janitor, and apparently my mother said he consistently saw spirits walking around while he was working there, but it didn't bother him, which I really do not know how it didn't. So as my father came rushing in, my mother told him what I saw, and he started shouting in his native language something along the lines of Muja. He repeatedly stated this phrase, and at the time I was unaware of its significance. Nonetheless, he continued to shout it throughout the duration in which I was crying in my mother's arms. After approximately 10 minutes, I began to feel better. Years after he passed, I brought this experience back up to my mother and asked her what my father was saying at the time, and my mother said he was shouting, "Move on, spirit, you're not welcome here." In that same conversation, my mother mentioned that after my experience, my father inquired about events in the neighborhood and discovered that a man had shot himself in the living room of the next door neighbor's house. They both agreed that he was most likely the head I saw that night. My mother also said that my father once saw a man reading a newspaper on the basement stairs when it was late at night, but it didn't bother him since he was already so used to seeing spirits. We moved out of that house a few years after my father passed. My mom passed away on a Saturday morning in late September of 1998. I saw her spirit leave her body when she died. That evening, I was returning home with my older brother, who had come home after hearing about Mom's stroke. I saw rows and rows of female angels around the entire house. All were young girls, under the age of 10. When I was in bed, I saw them all over my room. I dreamed that they came to pick Mom up at the hospital. Initially, my mom was reluctant to go with them. Before she died, she flatlined a couple of times. Her heart rate increased to 60 beats per minute, then flatlined again, dropped to 30 beats per minute, and finally, the flatline remained on the monitor. Then she went with them, skipping down the hospital hallway, out the door, and then they all took flight. I woke up and felt a strong sense of peace come over me, and I felt my mom was at peace. For several nights I had a dream of my mom sitting in a room dressed in a blue dress that she often wore to church. In the room were the angels that were flying around. The room was some type of waiting room, but she was the only one there. The door opened, and a male voice started talking to my mom, and my mother was standing on a ladder, climbing it. Certain areas of her life she did very well at, but when they got to the door, which was about marriage and love, the room went black, the door wouldn't open, and the ladder spun around so fast that my mom almost fell off. She almost got tangled in the ladder but didn't seem scared. The male voice expressed that my mom needed to enhance her skills during her next journey, given her unfortunate experiences with love and marriage. Sadly, that was true. Finally, she climbed to the top, where she was greeted by her mom, my maternal grandmother, her sister-in-law, aunt, and an old woman, unknown who she was, that I didn't recognize. In their dream, they were looking down a hole to see her come up. I woke up with a great sense of peace. Interestingly enough, my mom's older brother, my uncle, had a dream about my mom shortly after she died. He dreamed that she was greeted by my grandmother, his mother, my aunt, his wife, and an old lady that he didn't recognize. He didn't have the dream about the ladder but got the sense she had gone on quite a journey before she got to them. She looked tired. He knew that the older woman wasn't Grandma Buck. Grandma Buck was a woman who was like a second mother to my grandmother, as my great-grandmother had mental health issues due to PTSD. They didn't call it that back then, but she had some mental health issues due to trauma in her life. Both my mom and uncle knew this woman, as she often was over at the house, and they went to her home on a few occasions. We think that this older woman might have been the maternal grandmother of my mom and uncle. But then my great-grandmother died in her 50s, and this woman looked like she was much older. This woman might possibly have been named Aunt Sarah, but my uncle said she did not resemble her. Aunt Sarah was an older sister of my great-grandmother. For a while I tried to figure out who this woman was. I remember that she was dressed like one would during the Victorian era. She could have been the mother of both my great-grandmother and Aunt Sarah. So for now she's the mystery woman. My older brother didn't see my mother's spirit leave the body, nor did he see angels or have dreams about Mom. My brother is one who likes evidence or proof of something rather than blindly believing something. He didn't doubt that I saw my mom's spirit leaving her body but believed that my mind wanted to see this, like others who had experienced the same thing. This was for closure primarily. The dreams were wanting contact with Mom after death, and the mind created what was in my comfort level. Ditto with my uncle's dream, although he thought it was interesting that in each of our dreams, my mom was greeted by the same family members. I had a supernatural experience last night. So it happened last night, so it's still very fresh in my mind. I've been a caretaker in Scotland of a ridiculously large church, sanctuary, and 3 townhouses for the past 4 years. My job is to look after the various offices and function rooms of the 3 townhouses, manse, and church. These buildings are 4 stories high and were built in 1710. I also look after the church and sanctuary that are attached to the townhouses. It's a very large building attached to other large buildings. I start my evenings in there at around 18:30. I often don't switch on all the lights and have never felt threatened or creeped out carrying out my duties. Last night, however, I felt like an intense feeling of impending doom. I don't know how to describe it better than that. I told myself I was being ridiculous and tried to push the feeling to the back of my mind. At about 2000 hours I was in one of the charity creches, which is actually a really nice part of the building, not spooky at all, and I heard a man say my name. I looked around, but I was the only one there, so I dismissed it. Later I was walking through the bridge between the townhouses and church and heard footsteps behind me. I looked and saw no one, but the hair stuck up on my neck, and again, I tried to dismiss it. Walking out of the bridge and into the outer sanctuary, I looked into the glass partition to the inner sanctuary and swear I saw someone. I got a fright and went in to see who it was. Again, no one. I then heard a door slam up in the upper gallery. We have a choir room off the upper gallery, so I headed on up, saw no one, and tried to open the choir room and found it to be locked. I've never known it to be locked. I opened it with the master key and saw nothing except a few chairs and books, but smelled a bad smell like bad breath. I quickly closed it up and locked it again. At this point, I was more than uneasy. My last port of call at 10:30 was the crypt. I headed down the spiral stair into the crypt, which runs the entire underbuild of the property and also slightly under the main road outside, hard to explain. I cleaned up, and as I was moving down the corridor, I heard footsteps again. I looked around, no one. There is only one entrance and exit in the crypt, so I was certain I was alone. I quickly put my stuff away, did my final security sweep of the building, and locked up for the night. I had never felt so relieved to get out of the building. I normally love my job there, but I'm a bit apprehensive of working tonight. I worked in a nursing home for 3 years, primarily in the evenings, but I also worked the night shift for a year, so I have multiple shifts under my belt. It was a fairly small place with 3 floors of residence and the basement, clock, break room, storage, dietary, and such. So, one night I go to clock out for lunch, and I see another CNA from another floor doing the same, and we hear a phone, old school rotary, ringing in the distance. People were not good at transferring calls, but I assumed the ringing was coming from the director of nursing's office at the end of the hall. The girl goes to the break room, while I go outside to chain smoke. When I came back in, I heard the phone ringing again and saw the girl, and she was like, yeah, the phone never stopped ringing. At this point, we're both a little on edge, but I was trying to find a logical solution to make myself feel better. So, I bravely asked the girl to come with me, for protection, lol, and we went down the slightly crooked hallway. It kind of zigzagged a bit. We walked down the hall, the ringing getting louder, until we reach a rarely used storage room. I look at her and start to say something dismissive, like, see, we were scared for nothing. And mid-sentence, the phone stopped ringing. Needless to say, we both said, duck this, and ran back to our floors. Here's where it sounds super made up. Trust me, I've told this story many times and gotten the same looks every time. So the next day, I did an evening shift, and the nursing supervisor asked for help getting something out of the storage room. We get there, she unlocks the door, and I, accidentally, was like, duck that. I searched the room 10 times, but there was only one unconnected phone. Needless to say, I never went in that room again. All I'll say is that in those 3 years I saw and heard some weird shit, especially from the memory care patients. This was the one that bothered me the most, though. Is it an incubus? Alien? Spirit? What could it be? Experts needed. I have been dreaming of an unknown being, or having this being enter my dreams or take me into another dimensional space, for more than 2 years. I don't know who it is, I can't see his face most of the time. He doesn't usually talk to me, and when he does, his voice changes, but I always know it's him. At first, it was strange because every time I dream of him, it feels like entering another dimensional space. It's so real. Our interactions were initially at a stranger level, but he showed a strong interest in interacting with me while still maintaining boundaries. I remember him talking to me and answering some of the many questions I was asking back then. One of the few things he said to me was, "You are a chosen one." But he rarely speaks, and even when he does, it's more of a telepathic communication that goes straight into my mind. I recall one specific time when I had a boyfriend. He grabbed my arm tightly, so much that it hurt a little, and he didn't want to let go. Over the years, I've gone back and forth between thinking, wow, he's real. An otherworldly being is trying to connect with me, and dismissing it as just a dream. Eventually, I got used to his presence and stopped asking so many questions whenever he appeared. Now, I treat it as a dream when I wake up and go about my everyday life. But in the last year, these encounters have increased in frequency, intensity, and physicality. In many of the dreams, I get pulled into a completely dark and confined space with very little visibility. In these moments, I can only feel the incredibly real touch of this being on my body. He often engages in intensely satisfying intercourse with me in the dark, typically from behind. My hypothesis is that this position allows him to avoid showing his face. I started recording these dreams at the end of last year and was shocked by their frequency. On average, they happen once every 3 to 5 days. Strangely, I don't feel exhausted or drained after these dreams. Instead, I often wake up feeling a bit scared because of how real they are. The reason I'm seeking advice is because of what happened 2 days ago. The dream started as usual, nice and sweet, but toward the end, I somehow managed to see his figure in the dark. I couldn't help but notice that his head was oddly shaped, almost like a weird square. I stopped being intimate with him and felt unsettled and shocked. The being noticed my reaction and, without hesitation, bit my right forearm and started sucking with an unnaturally wide mouth. The bite was painful, but it was not as painful as if it were in the real world. I tried to push him away and wake up but couldn't. Eventually, I stopped resisting and stared at him. Not long after that, I was able to push him away and wake up. It scared the hell out of me because he has never done that before. I felt like I might not return to reality if I stayed there longer. I'm reaching out to get opinions from experts about what this being might be, what it wants, and, if it's a demon or negative entity, how I can cast it away. Saw something demonic. I would appreciate any thoughts you all have on this. Although no one believed me, this was a very real experience for me. I want to start by saying that I've seen 2 guys who appeared to be my age and had supernatural, glowing bright gold eyes. Both at my work at the time. One of them was my coworker. He got mad, and his eyes went gold. He would also ask questions like if I was baptized, believed in God, and would ever do bad things to people. Like he was trying to read my soul. I believe these people were demons high on the hierarchy, and I believe what I saw was them in their more real form. Moving on, over the course of about a week, I kept getting weird sensations on my body, specifically of a gigantic spider crawling on my back. Towards the end of that week, as I would sleep, I would see my coworker with the gold eyes in my dreams. The dream always involved something bad and threatening. During the last 2 days of that week, I heard a clown-like voice at my front door, sounding like a red demonic energy, telling me to open the door as I was drifting off to sleep but still awake. I ignored it, and nothing happened. On the second night, the voice grew very loud, demanding that I open the door again, and I felt my body being shaken and drawn to stay with this entity forever and ever. I heard it screaming downstairs and making its way up the stairs, where I encountered unpleasant sounds. I kept my eyes closed during this because I didn't want to see anything, but unfortunately I saw something. When I opened my eyes, I saw a gigantic golden spider, like the size of a pumpkin, and tons of baby black spiders at my feet. Then I saw it, a tall black shadow figure with horns, and I saw a huge diamond fall from the roof. It was so eerie, as behind it were tons of crosses. It said, "Stay a while," after being silent for a minute. My main question is, if the creature was demonic, do you think they gave up? It was certainly a demon high on the hierarchy. Do they move on once they fail? Or keep trying? Nothing has happened for over 6 months since this encounter. How did it even get in if I never opened the door? I know negative entities need an invitation, and I never gave it one. If you have any thoughts, please let me know. Skinwalkers, werewolves, watchers on the lake. We went to a house on the lake to celebrate my mom's birthday and experienced a lot of creepy stuff. On the first day, I noticed a weird dog. We let the gate open, so a lot of dogs of the place just hang out there, and joked about it being a skinwalker because he had a human face and look. Later that same day, my friend approached the dog at one specific moment when it was screaming like a human and asked, "Are you a person?" The dog got mad. He looked like a cat with goosebumps. Then we decided to go to the lake at night, but it seemed like the dog didn't want us to leave. He ran behind us once, which made us turn back, laughing nervously. But we tried again, and the dog was at the gate, barking, "Don't go." Of course, like in every horror movie, we insisted on going. We were scared to go to the lake. Unlike before, so we held hands like kids. I heard people running and saw shadows coming and going, but I didn't say anything because I thought I was crazy. But my cousin, who was laughing at us about the dog, said, "Guys, do you hear people running?" Everybody heard. So we went back to the house again, and the dog was like, "Didn't I tell you? Lol." We really think it was protecting us. It didn't scare us at all. We were only finding it creepy because he was cynical. When it saw us trying to film it, it would immediately start acting like a normal dog, or when we called someone to see. It was very clear how much he acted differently. On the second day, the dog was gone, but my aunt, who had laughed at us on the first day, told me she heard a grunt-like noise and saw something jumping over the small wall in the yard. When she opened her door, she discovered another one of the dogs. That day we didn't get the awful feeling going to the lake, so we stayed hours there smoking and talking. When we got there, I heard steps and was a little paranoid, so my boyfriend looked to the woods the whole time, while I was looking at the lake. At one point I turned around, and I saw tall white humanoid creatures looking at us, I swear, just like in the movie The Watchers, but they didn't pass on a bad feeling or fear, it was only the bother of having people watching you. So I insisted we go home because I was afraid my friends would say shit and they would get offended, I'd lol. We discussed it again when we got home, and my boyfriend saw the same thing in the woods. One of my friends saw it too, and the ones who didn't see it were also feeling watched. We heard some sounds that resembled a scream and a siren, similar to how people describe mermaids. I don't know, we believe that the creatures running around were different from the Watchers. The Watchers weren't scary. And I think the dog protecting us was one of those white creatures we saw on the lake. While discussing our experience, we recalled that during our first visit to that place, the owner mentioned stories about werewolves, perhaps they were referring to skinwalkers or something similar. And it's Lent, people here in Brazil say Lent, Quaresma, is the time of werewolves in the interior. So, anybody with similar experiences? Does somebody know what the duck we saw? Supernatural encounter when I was a child. Hello. I decided to share my only real encounters from childhood and my thoughts on those experiences. I usually keep it to myself, but I am trying to be better at expressing myself better these days because it's just good for the soul. The first was when I was 6 years old, and I will just explain this one for now. I believe in the supernatural because these vivid experiences were so real that they are forever imprinted in my mind, unlike dreams. Throughout all the times I played and used my imagination, I always had specific starting points, such as certain pleasant topics that encouraged me to be creative, including playing house, unicorns, puppies and kittens, being a ballerina, and a famous singer living double lives, like Jam and the Holograms, not the Hannah Montana generation. Adults would like to tell you that you're just being silly and you didn't really see what you saw, but I think children are a lot more intuitive to the physical senses around them than adults like to give them credit for. Our perception of the world isn't as complex at that age, so we see it as we see it and tell it how it is. I was never exposed to such ideas of ghosts and other unexplainable creepy things, so why would I have created what I saw at 6 years old? Or the other experience I had when I was 8 or 10? I'm not highly religious, but I believe in it in the spiritual sense, and after an encounter like this, I don't find any other conclusion why I wouldn't be. My mother was a devout Catholic, Philippine Catholic, and she prayed often but never really involved us in all the complex rituals and prayers. Our prayers were more simple, about what we were grateful for and to protect us. I was one of those kids who had a lot of energy, so I would lie in bed half awake a lot at night. In my house, we usually sleep with our doors open. At the time, I shared a room with my brother, who was 2 years older. Our room was at the other end of the hallway in a 2-story military house. The father was in the Navy. My mother during this time would pray before she would go to sleep, but this time her prayers seemed to resonate more of an echo like you would hear at a church with high ceilings. The lights in the hallway were dim, and I couldn't tell what time it was because I didn't know how to read a clock at that age. However, I noticed a clock hanging high on the wall between our rooms on the left side of the hallway, and it felt later than usual as I got out of bed to check on my mother, curious about why her voice sounded so different. It was a female voice, but it wasn't hers either as I got closer to my parents' room. The door was open, and I looked in. There was a dim lamplight, but she, my father, and my baby brother were sleeping in the bed. There was also a strong scent of a flower. I realized later in life that this was the magnolia as I passed a tree and smelled it again, and it would take me back to this encounter. I was looking around to find the source of the voice, and I didn't feel fear because seeing my family asleep peacefully, the smell, and the dimmed lights weren't giving off a fearful atmosphere but more a serene, somber one. My parents' room was at the end of the hall, but all the doors were on the left-hand side, so there was still a little space of hallway and a wall at the very end, and that's when I looked up. It came from a framed picture of a white and blue Santo Nino, Child Christ, Painting. This picture envisioned the Santo Nino with pale white skin, with long curly hair, very feminine, and dark black eyes. It was shaking from the wall, and the voice became louder. This was when I started feeling paralyzing fear. I could not look away, yet I wanted to run, and I was in shock that I was actually witnessing what was happening. I finally turned to what felt like minutes, then seconds, to my parents in the bed and in the room, and they were sleeping and could not hear a thing. I managed to call out very timidly, "Mom," and I just bolted down the hallway back to my room and into my bed. My brother was also still sleeping, as I could hear the echo and voice, still chanting a prayer, coming closer, and that's when I put the sheets over the bed, tucked them tight under me, buried my head into my pillow, and closed my eyes. It was agony listening to it for what seemed forever. It was booming, and then it faded after hours. I didn't get much sleep, and I was finally able to close my eyes and sleep as soon as I could see the light from dawn through the sheets creeping out through the window blinds. My mother woke me up, helped me get dressed, made me breakfast, and lightly scolded me for not sleeping because she could see how tired I still was. I told her about the picture and asked her why no one got up to check it. She just told me that it could have been from lack of sleeping, that's why I saw and heard what I did, and that I should take it as a blessing. I think she sensed halfway how strange it was that her daughter would bring this particular incident up. From that day on, I was too afraid to go upstairs alone or sleep without the covers over me until we moved homes. I grew out of sleeping with the covers over my head when I was 16. Even as an adult, my mother continued to own that picture, and each time I passed it in my parents' home, I would glance at it for a brief moment, hoping to see or hear it again, but I never did. It was definitely an encounter with some kind of spirit. Something turned the lights off and giggled. A few nights ago, maybe a week now, I went to the bathroom before bed. My girlfriend was lying down in our room, and I tossed a blanket on top of her since she was saying she was cold. The lights in the living room, the lamp in our room, and the kitchen lights were all on. I remember having to turn the kitchen light on as I walked to the bathroom from the bedroom and through the living room to do my business. As I opened the bathroom door to go back to bed, all the lights suddenly shut off in what seemed like a millisecond after the door opened. The kitchen, living room, and bedroom lamp. I even felt a presence, as if something was standing right in front of me in the darkness of the doorway, followed by a childlike, prankster-like giggle and the sound of someone running back to our bedroom. I assumed it was my girlfriend, so I even called out, "Okay, very funny." And as I typed this, I realized it was way too fast to be my girlfriend. I walked to our room, she's still under the blanket I placed on her before going to the bathroom. Still laughing it off, I said something to the effect of, "Oh, so you didn't turn all the lights off?" She replied that she had not moved from her spot on the bed. Something has haunted my family for years, which caused Ed and Lorraine Warren to visit my mother in college, but we are still haunted to this day. My mother went to Eastern Washington University and stayed in one of the houses the locals rented out to college students. I cannot give the exact age of the house, but it was old enough to have a built-in button on the floor that would call up to the servants in the attic, so the house was relatively old. During her studies there, she had 3 different roommates. My uncle was the first, followed by my mother's best friend, and then my father took his place. All 3 of them can confirm strange happenings in this house and being woken up in the middle of the night with people whispering. The worst of it was in my mother's room in the attic. My mother hated that house, but she didn't have anywhere else to live, and the dorms were expensive, so she sucked it up and lived there until she graduated. She hated sleeping alone, the air in her room constantly felt thick and heavy, her closet was constantly freezing cold, and at night she would hear multiple people whispering incoherent words at once. While living there, my mother had a cat named Puss who would constantly hide under the bed. One time my mother caught Puss out from under her bed, sitting, watching, and growling at one of the corners of the room. My mother went over to Puss, confused at what she was looking at, until she saw a black figure in the corner slowly start to move upwards toward the ceiling. Puss started to become more aggressive, her hissing and growling getting louder before she freaked out and shot off back under the bed, still growling at the corner until the black figure was gone. My mother had never seen Puss act like this since Puss was usually a very loving and happy cat, but whatever that was clearly terrified her cat. Sometime later my mother was talking with a friend who was excited to be touring 2 famous paranormal investigators around the college and town, showing them supposed haunted places. My mother brought up the fact that she has always had weird stuff happening in her house and thinks it may be haunted. Her friend got excited and begged her to let him bring them to her house. My mother refused since she wasn't willing to stay up late for some people that she doesn't even know. At that time, my mother didn't know who the investigators were because she had never kept up with paranormal topics, which she believed could invite evil into one's life. She only knew that they had appeared on several popular talk shows. These two investigators were Ed and Lorraine Warren. Around midnight, my mother's best friend comes to her and tells her that there are people at the door wanting to speak to her. Confused, my mother got in a robe and went to the front door. There she saw her tour guide friend with 12 other students behind Ed and Lorraine Warren. Lorraine asked my mom if they could come in because their guide said her house might be haunted. My mother agreed and let them all in. Lorraine asked my mother where in the house the haunting was most active, and my mother informed her that it was in her bedroom, explaining that she would take Ed and Lorraine there while everyone else had to wait. They agreed, and my mother took Ed and Lorraine to her room. When my mother entered her room, she sat on her bed and asked if they could feel it, how heavy the air was. Ed and Lorraine thought the air was heavy, like in some haunted places. Lorraine walked around the room and then to the closet and asked if she could hear voices here. My mother broke down crying and said she could hear them every night and that it kept her up at night. Lorraine told her that it was possible that her closet was a doorway for those who passed on or a doorway to hell. My mother continued to cry before Lorraine came over to her and told her that the reason this stuff is happening to her is because of her mom's family, that the women have some connection with those beyond, and that it's possible that they are psychics, which makes the dead attracted to her. My mother then told Lorraine about the black figure, which Lorraine told her wasn't from this house but was connected to her family, mainly her dad's side, and that it most likely went after her grandfather, her father, and now her. The figure isn't a ghost or a demon but something pure evil, and it wants her. Fearful, my mother asked them if they could bless her room, which they did, and after further investigation, Ed and Lorraine told her that her house was the first place that actually showed activity and signs of haunting in the whole area. After they finished blessing the house, Ed and Lorraine left. Time passed, and my mom's best friend moved out, and my dad moved in. The activity in the house still continued even after the blessing. Initially, my father doubted the haunting of the house, but one night, as he slept in my mom's bed, he heard the whispering. He asked my mother what she said, and she told him she didn't say anything. After a few moments of silence between them, she asked if he could hear them. Confused, my father asked what she was talking about, and she told him about the whispering. He then agreed that she had heard the whispering and asked where it was coming from. She replied that it was coming from the closet and that it happened every night. Sometime after, my father got curious about whether or not the servants' button still worked. Originally, no one had ever been in the attic. Both of my parents went up to the attic but had to turn back before reaching the top because the temperature dropped to freezing, making it difficult for them to breathe, and my mother began to panic, feeling as though she was being choked. She quickly told my father to turn back around because it felt as though they were not wanted up there. Not wanting to upset my mother more, my father agreed and turned back around, never to go up there again. Once my mother graduated college, they moved out of the house, and strange events continued to happen no matter where they moved. Around the time I was born, my parents lived in a rather small house with my two older brothers. Constantly our cats would freak out, growling and hissing at the corners of the house. Not only that, but my mother would constantly see this black figure around the house. Later, my family had our new house constructed, and we moved out of our old one. These strange events followed us and got worse. One day, when I was around 5, I was walking outside my room to go downstairs. The moment I walked to the balcony, I felt someone grab my arm extremely roughly. I turned around, and I just saw a black figure holding my arm. I screamed for my mother. My mother came running upstairs, and she saw the black figure. She grabbed my arm and tried to pull me away, but the figure would not let me go. She pulled as hard as she could and ripped me away from the black figure. As she proceeded, the figure vanished, leaving behind a massive handprint on my arm. My mother ran downstairs and screamed at my father to get my brothers, telling them that we were leaving the house until it was blessed. We later had a priest come to our house and bless it. Afterward the activity stopped, but growing up, I and my second older brother would constantly have nightmares of this figure in our dreams doing awful things to us, but it had bright red eyes and would chase us. Nothing else has happened since then, and I still live in the house, but occasionally I experience a sudden fear coming from the staircase. I never go downstairs at night without the lights on out of fear of this thing that is possibly still here. I told my mom about her dreams and other things, but she avoids talking about it, thinking it will come back if we do. However, she informed me that she had discussed this figure with my grandfather, who remained reticent to discuss it. Ever since she first brought it up, he had become as pale as a ghost. He said that the figure that tormented him as a child was the same one that tormented his father. My mother didn't realize that it was Ed and Lorraine Warren until we were watching a documentary about them and she pointed out that they were the ones who came to her house. I was speechless, and she was confused as I told her that they were Ed and Lorraine Warren, the most famous paranormal investigators, that they were the ones who started publicly doing paranormal investigations, and that there are famous horror movies that involve them. My mother freaks out and tells my father about it, and while my father was shocked, he didn't think much of it. I apologize if my story seems a bit disorganized, but this was my best effort to explain my mother's story and my personal experience, as my mother tends to avoid discussing it due to fear. Has someone had a similar experience? Also, what could this entity be? I've got a weird experience I had when I was a kid that I'm very curious to learn more from. When I was around the age of 11, I saw a black shadowy figure outlined in fuzzy white lines. My room was in the basement, I didn't have a door on the hinges, my dad's fault, and looking straight while I was on my bed, I could see the gaming area. My room was behind the game room, and the laundry room curtain, which was on the left. My brother was also in the room with me on the opposite side, so all the way to my right. I woke up in the middle of the night and looked out of my room. I saw this black shadowy figure coming out of the laundry room. It was tall. Way to talk. As you said, it also looked skinnier, with not as much muscle. It moved its torso and shoulders weirdly to get into my room and under the door. It then came towards my bed. I was terrified and covered my head with my blanket. I felt its hand sink into my chest and put and hold pressure there for who knows how long. Once I uncovered the blanket from my face, the entity bolted away. I don't know how it moved that fast. This happened in an instant. It bolted out of my room and went to the laundry room, but before disappearing, it looked at me one last time, and then, poof, it left the unfinished laundry room. Does anyone know what this could have been? Encounter when I was younger. Hi there, I'm new here. I've never really spoken about this besides maybe to a few close friends from secondary school. I'm from the UK. I can't remember exactly how many years ago this did happen, but I can tell you it definitely was early during my time in secondary. Regardless, it all started one evening. I vividly remember this. I was in my bathroom, having just finished going to the toilet and brushing my teeth. When I was younger, I loved standing on top of the closed toilet seat to peek out of the window. The windows were about halfway up the wall, split into three. One large, long one to my right. A medium-sized one in the bottom left and then a small sideways rectangular one in the top left corner. Furthermore, my bathroom is on the first floor. When peeking out the window, I could see into my back garden. It was pitch black due to how late it was, with the only source of illumination being from downstairs and from the bathroom itself, casting light down to a certain limited distance. While I was looking out the window for fun, I thought I saw something moving near the tall wooden fences that separate my garden from a small wooded area leading to a railway network. I still don't know what it was to this day, but it was some kind of tall, incredibly skinny, very thin, shadow entity thing. It is hard to explain, but the shadow entity moved from left to right before disappearing from my view. I was very confused and somewhat scared, so I went downstairs to tell my parents about it. They didn't really believe me and thought I was just seeing things, maybe believing it was because I was tired. I understand why they didn't believe me, even if I was a little frustrated about it. Regardless, I simply went to bed. That's when shit really got scary. I had about 3 dreams that night, repeatedly waking up before going back to sleep. In the first dream I remember, I was rich and in some kind of mansion. I seemed to be enjoying myself. But, there was this random woman with long black hair and, I believe, possibly a white dress too. Point being, it was some creepy woman who slowly entered my mansion. It scared me so much I literally jumped from the first floor of my mansion. When landing, you know when you get that strange, tight feeling in your chest when you hit the floor from a tall height in your dream and it feels like you're going through the ground? Yeah, I had that. It caused me to wake up. While falling back asleep, I don't remember much of the second dream to this day, but I do recall that the strange woman appeared in it again. It frightened me again and caused me to wake up. Then came the final dream. It was simply just a white, empty void I was in, sitting down. In the distance, not too far away, there sat what looked like the woman, crying and huddled up. She didn't seem scary this time, like she was still human, yet I could recognize it was that woman. After some time, that shadow entity that I saw in the back garden appeared in my dream. It approached the woman, placing its long arm, long fingers, and large hand on her, and it seemed to possess her. It felt like she didn't want this. When it happened, that was when I had the creepy feeling from the woman come back. She slowly turned to look at me and gave an incredibly creepy and wide smile. I finally then woke up, scared shitless at the repeated dreams I had in a single night with that strange woman. It was so vivid that, of course, I can still remember it to this day in terms of the important parts. For about a period of time, I believe over the span of a few months, more weird shit started happening. I remember I was playing out with my friends in the neighborhood. In between two houses, there's this gap that you can see that leads up to a hill that is part of that wooded area I told you about above. While I was playing outside, I glanced into the gap between the houses and immediately froze. To this day, I swear I saw that shadow entity again, but this time during the day. It passed quickly between the gap, and I immediately told my friends about it. My friends said they didn't see anything, but they were clearly unnerved by my sudden mention of the shadow entity. Then the final and scariest incident happened out of all of them. This incident solidified my belief that I had indeed seen something and was not experiencing hallucinations. I was out playing with my neighbors again. My house is situated on an elevated area, with houses at a similar elevation to the right and houses at a lower elevation to the left. Just coincidentally looking up while moving around, I froze again as I spotted something. Someone standing in my neighbor's parents' bedroom. It seemed like a shadow person again. This time, he looked thicker, but his body was obscured by the partially see-through curtains. He looked like he was wearing a mask, with a very creepy smile on it. I couldn't tell if it was a mask or its actual face, but I found myself staring at it in terror. This time, I made sure to keep eye contact on it, never letting it out of my sight, as I quickly told my two friends, who were the neighbors, and my younger brother, who was present with me, that this entity was in their house. I pointed up to it, and they all looked up. And their faces immediately widened. They told me they could see it too. I wasn't going crazy. We just stood there staring at whatever the hell was staring back at us. My younger brother started to cry while clinging to me, as one of my friends rushed back into the house to check on the entity. As she did this, the entity seemed to slowly fade in terms of how clear it was. By the time she got into the bedroom, pulling the curtains to the side and waving at us, she came back down to tell us something that was creepy. She just passively asked her parents if anyone had been in the bedroom in the past few minutes or so. They both said no. But most importantly, she also asked if anyone had left the door open too, because it was like that when she went up. I believe it was her father who looked puzzled at her and said that he had closed the door earlier in the day and no one has been in since. So whatever was in their house opened the door, stared at us, and then disappeared before she could get into the bedroom with it. Weirdly, after that, nothing else happened. Those were the only instances I experienced with whatever that was. It wasn't just me who saw it, other people did too. I saw it in real life and in that odd dream sequence, and it was mostly vivid. I used to call him the Shadow Man whenever I brought it up to my close friends. To this day, nothing else has happened, it was only for that strange window of time. I want to know what people's thoughts are about this. I decided to finally write something about it after so long because, I don't know, I just felt like now was the right time, being an adult and all. I used to live in a haunted house with my parents and 3 younger brothers. I could fill a trilogy with all the different things I've seen, but this is a story I don't think I've told on here before. I was 17, a new driver, and going about 35 miles an hour, driving pretty safely. All of a sudden my CD skipped and made this horrible noise through the speakers. Next thing I know, my car is slightly wrapped around a telephone pole. I call my mom completely frazzled, and she shows up with my brothers. The car gets towed, and my mom takes me home. She was exasperated with my brothers already that day, so this was just the cherry on top. We're back at the house, and I'm racking my brain about how that could have happened. I was driving on the right side, USA, but I somehow crashed into a pole on the complete other side of the road. I didn't feel the wheel turn at all, but my car was turned around. So my mom yells up to me at about 4:30 p.m. "Kylie, I'm taking the boys to baseball, I'll be back at 9. I say okay and go to the bathroom to unwind and take a bath. I'm in the bath for about 15 minutes, and I hear my mom's new puppy start whimpering and barking. She's standing outside the dining room. We believe this to be the most haunted part of the house, and none of our animals ever went in there. The chandelier was swinging, and the dog looked scared, so I threw on a towel and ran down to get her. She was too small to climb the stairs. As soon as I pick her up, the chandelier stops dead in its tracks. I stare for a minute, then I hear the same noise that came out of my speaker in my car coming from upstairs. I run back up carrying the dog, and every electronic in my 15-year-old brother's room is on and at full volume. The lights/fan, the TV, the PS3, the Xbox, the speakers blaring, the disco lights going off, everything. It was still light outside, so there was no reason for the lights to have been on before. My mom is also a stickler for turning things off before we leave the house, so she never would have left the house like that. I frantically turned everything off and walked out back towards the bathroom. The dog is cowering with her ears back, looking at the closed bathroom door. I didn't close it behind me. I picked her up and started slowly walking towards the door. I reached for the handle, and it was burning hot. I burned my hand and accidentally dropped the puppy. She went running, whimpering, far away from the door, so I followed. I just sat in my parents' room with her and panicked until someone finally got home. The Watchman? Owlman spotted. Location, Bronx, New York. Date, June, 1904. Time, night. Acting Captain Wilson of the Bronx Park Police Station last night asked the superintendent of the Zoological Gardens to try to take into custody a big brown owl that for the past 3 weeks has been scaring the policemen who were assigned to Post 16, which is one of the loneliest posts in the gloomy old Bronx. For many days it was believed that a winged demon had deigned to hover over Post 16, and the policemen who were assigned to duty there came into the old station in the Lorillard mansion night after night with wonderful tales of what had happened on the hoodoo post. Policeman Patrick J. Hickey said it was the most horrid thing he had ever encountered. "It's not an owl," said Hickey, "it's a devil with wings. Sure, I know an owl when I see one, but no man has ever seen an owl with wings 6 feet wide. And it whoos like a ghost in a graveyard, too, when it's not growling beneath its breath. Why, men, he's no owl, he's a devil, and I'm going to get transferred." And when Hickey was transferred, a German policeman was assigned to post number 16, which takes in Lorillard Lane. The German policeman had only been on the post an hour one night when he came running into the station house and shouted, "I've seen it. It had a stick on its claw, and it tried to smash my head. When I ducked, it ducked, too, and I had to run behind a tree. I think it is supernatural, that's what I think." After the strange creature on wings knocked his helmet off while patrolling the lane, policeman Walter Kane was quickly transferred to the hoodoo post. Policeman Frank Campbell, who was sent to the Bronx station from a downtown Manhattan precinct, was on duty on post 16 for only 2 nights when he encountered something strange that flew down from the trees and attacked him. He had not heard of the experiences of the other men who had been on post 16, but when he entered the station a few nights ago with his face scratched and his helmet battered in, he wrote out this report. "Shortly before midnight I encountered a dark, flying object with 4 legs and 2 wings. The beast attacked me, if it was a beast, and I fought back. Has the resemblance of a tall, slim man at times, and at other times assumes the form of a mountain dwarf. Last night, June 21st, Julius Wench, who resides at Bronxdale, ran into the police station and shouted for help. He told Sergeant Oppel, who was at the desk, that he had been attacked by something wild that yelled like a tiger. He said the strange thing had carried away a young woman who was in his company, and he asked for police assistance. Policemen Ollett and Baker were sent to rescue the girl, and they found her running through Lorillard Lane screaming. She explained that a wildcat with wings had attacked her and had torn the feathers from her hat. The policeman went back to the station and reported that it was undoubtedly the big brown owl that had been frightening policemen for the past 3 weeks. The acting captain notified the Bronx Park folks, and a squad of men was sent out to capture the thing at midnight. No additional information as to what occurred. Collection of supernatural encounters, the one where I maybe met the devil. Some background info: when I was 6, my mom remarried, and my stepdad was in the military. We traveled around a lot, mostly stateside. We were only stationed at one overseas base, Aviano AFB. It's in Italy, you can look it up. Just about everyone that has been stationed there has a creepy story or two about a weird happenstance or unexplainable event. That's where this encounter happened. The first time I met the devil I was 8. I was living in Clovis, New Mexico. Maybe it was a weird dream brought on by the stress of me getting my first communion. I was raised Catholic. The point is that moment is extremely vivid to me to this day. I was lying in bed under my favorite blanket. It was a red plush blanket with a picture of a lion, and I couldn't sleep without it. For some reason, on that particular night, I kept kicking the blanket off of me and onto the ground. I would wake up and pull it back up and go back to sleep. I woke up, and the blanket was gone. I reached over to pick it up, but there was nothing there. Here I am, it's dark, it's cold, and if my digital clock is accurate, it's around 3 a.m. So I hoist myself halfway off the bed to look underneath it, and out steps this little devil-looking guy. I can't tell you what color he was for certain, but you could see him and the horns on his head very clearly. His face was horrifying, these big creepy eyes with slits for pupils and a twisted grin that never left his face, but his voice was absolutely soothing. So when he spoke, I wasn't frightened at all. "Me, can I have my blanket back, please?" "It. No, I'm sorry, but it's not yours anymore." "Me, but I'm cold." "It, you can't have it back. Anything that touches the ground at this time belongs to the devil, and you can only get it back by signing a contract." Now remember, I'm 8. This blanket is my favorite thing in the world besides Hoppy Hopper, my pink stuffed rabbit, of course. I say okay, so he pulls out this little paper and pen, and I sign, agreeing to who knows what, and he pulls my blanket out and hands it back. Why is any of this important? It was probably just a super weird stress dream had by a bratty kid watching too much TV and reading too many Bible verses. As I mentioned earlier, this moment was extremely vivid for me. It is one of those memories that resurfaces repeatedly, even when I don't intend for it to. Now I'm not a hippie or an astral child or anything like that. Even when I was going to church, I wasn't particularly religious, but my mom and grandma were always telling me, what you put out comes back to you, meaning if you go looking for trouble, trouble will soon start finding you, or happiness, mischief, etc. So it always kind of stuck with me. When it came to things like the devil or ghosts, my mom would get very upset, and she would tell me to stop thinking of those things. Those things are real, and thinking of them opens a door for them to reach you. You get back what you put out, so think of God and angels. Okay, Mom, but I can't help it that this weird dream of me signing my soul to the devil keeps playing in my head. I learned to not mention things like that to my mom, so I just kept it to myself. Shortly after turning 9, we left Clovis to move to Aviano. Commence creepy shit. I have a lot of stories of creepy shit that happened to me there. So I lived in Italy from age 9 to 14, yes, it was awesome. When I was about 12 or so, I woke up in the middle of the night having to pee. I stepped out of bed, and all of a sudden I heard my brother scream from down the hall, "No! Leave me alone! Leave me alone!" in this horrible booming voice. I was frozen stiff. I jumped back in bed terrified, covered myself and my dog Brittany, and stayed there till morning. The next day when I asked my brother about it, he said he didn't remember having any dreams or anything like that, and my mom and stepfather also said they would have woken up if he had screamed since their room was across the hall. Plus neither Mia nor Brittany had barked or woken up, and Mia was in the same room as my brother. Okay, fine, no big deal. I started thinking of that weird dream again. I even shared it with a couple of my friends. They all laughed, and we joked about it. It's hard for me to write about this not because it was especially traumatic, though it was, but more because it's hard to describe something so simple. I feel like people think of demonic encounters and imagine mirrors with monsters in them, blood dripping from walls, etc. If these things happen, they happen to someone else. I woke up, it was a regular night, and I couldn't go back to sleep, so I decided to go to the bathroom if nothing else to get out of bed. The way our house was laid out, the bedrooms all sat in a hallway off the living room, with 2 rooms to each side. My room was across from the bathroom and the first bedroom in the hall, which was my parents' room. The bathroom was on the left. So I step into the hall and feel this presence. Looking down the hall, I see this massive figure crouched down there. I'm talking super ducking huge. It was so huge that it couldn't stand upright in the hall, which is why it had to crouch. It had no distinguishing features, it just looked like a giant shadow, and it reached out and grabbed me. I felt it squeezing me, and I couldn't do anything but pray for someone to help, and just like that, it let me go, and it disappeared. I would have chalked it all up to a nightmare if I didn't smash my foot against the power transformer and split my big toe open in my haste to get back in bed. This time, I screamed loudly. Everyone rushed into my room, and shortly after, my mom re-enrolled me in Sunday school. Even now as an adult, whenever I think of it, I try and think of anything else. You get back what you put out. Worked on the oncology floor of a local hospital. It was divided into 2 hallways with a nurse's station, offices, and a break room in the middle. One hallway was always often darker than the other. I avoided working that side, if at all possible, and always tried to have a buddy with me. So many things happened there. I'll try and list the ones that stand out the most. Obviously, there was a lot of death. That, in itself, didn't bother me. I took it as my job was to help make them comfortable and peaceful in their transition. But, it always came in multiples of 3s. Every single time. If a patient passed, we started trying to figure out who the next 2 would be. I remember a few times we got to 4 and realized that there would be 6 that day. It was never just 1 or 2. The situation wasn't particularly supernatural, but it was certainly unsettling. The dark hallway had one room that was really awful. In that room, there was a vinyl padded chair, and at one point, one of our regular patients began screaming and telling someone to get away from them. We run in the room, don't see anyone, and hear the distinctive noise of someone shifting in the chair. It had an impression in it, just like someone sitting. It stayed like that for 3 days, until she died, then went back to normal. Patients definitely see loved ones in the days/hours before death. Every single one would talk about it. In a way, it's comforting, knowing you're not alone, but still nerve-wracking. I've had patients introduce me to their ghost family. You just have to smile and acknowledge them. Lots of call lights going off in empty rooms. Not only are there call lights, but also emergency alarms and beeping IVs. It's a little crazy when the whole floor of nurses runs to an empty room with a crash cart. There are numerous voices whispering your name, and objects are constantly moving or falling. Sometimes, you would hear people calling for help, only to find that they are asleep or that no one is present. The man who wasn't there. I want to preface this by first stating that the story I'm about to tell is 100% real. There is no fabrication in what you're about to read. Multiple people witnessed this encounter, and while I to this day consider myself a skeptic of the paranormal, I cannot for the life of me explain this. I haven't told this story pretty much to anyone outside of my immediate friend group, so forgive me if my storytelling is a bit rusty. In the early 2010s I went to college in Boston, and for my 4 years at the school I attended, I lived on campus in an old dorm building. The 13-story building was constructed in 1917, and prior to the school purchasing it in the mid-90s, it served as an illustrious office space and shopping center. What I mean to say is this building had a lot of history, and a lot of people had walked within its walls. Fast forward to 2011, my sophomore year of college. I lived in a 5-person dorm suite with 4 other roommates. We had a common room area where we'd all hang out and watch TV. That space contained a massive large window that looked across the way, further down our floor's hall, to the adjacent suite, in which 5 girls from our class lived. Their suite had a similar large glass window that looked into their common room. When they pulled up the blinds from their common room, they had a direct view into our common room, and we had the same view into theirs. One night, I and my suite mates Jake and Mike are all sitting in our common room sharing a pizza and marathoning kung fu movies. I want to mention here that Jake and Mike are 2 of the most well-read and most intelligent people I've ever known. Both of these friends of mine are not privy to believing in anything supernatural or beyond the realm of our known reality. This is important to note for later. Anyway, it's late, around midnight, we're watching movies and devouring pizza. At the time, all 3 of us were more or less straight edge, so there was no consumption of drugs or booze going on as well. We were completely sober, except for the intoxicating effects of both pizza and martial arts. We're watching the movie when out of the window I catch the motion of something moving across the way. We all notice it and look over to the common room of the suite adjacent to ours. We could see it clear as day. The lights had been left on in the girls' common room, so it was very easy to see the entire room clearly from our perspective. As we're looking, we see what appears to be a member of the school's custodial staff walking through the middle of the girls' suite. He looks late middle-aged and balding, wearing coveralls with a utility belt. It wouldn't have been that odd except for the fact that the school's custodial department is closed early, like before 9 p.m., and no custodians make calls beyond that time. Beyond that, the school had recently sent out warnings about unhoused people sneaking into the dorm building from the streets and entering unlocked dorms. I quickly noted how odd it was that this man was in the girls' suite so late at night, when the janitors were off duty. Maybe it was a plumbing emergency? I remember Mike suggesting. Could be, I replied. But something still felt off about it. It was odd that the girls who lived in this suite were friends of ours, and none of them were around when this guy passed through their common room, so we felt we had to confront him and ask what he was doing in an all-girls suite at midnight. Mike, Jake, and I run out into the hallway, hoping we'd catch the guy before he got on the elevator. The girls' suite in question was right across the hall from the elevators. There were about 6 elevator shafts, but only 4 were functional and in use. The other 2 elevator shafts were vacant, and the doors of those shafts were gated off so no one could ever possibly open or enter them. As we found ourselves out in the hallway, looking down towards the elevators, we saw this guy, this custodian, walking straight towards them. We quicken our pace to catch up to him. He's close enough we can clearly see him, but we're maybe 6 to 7 doors down from where he's walking. As we close in on him, I call out, "Hey man," hoping to get his attention. This experience remains etched in my memory, still bringing chills to my spine. He never responded to that. I was maybe 50 feet away from him, and he never turned his head or acknowledged us there. There was no one else in the hall at that hour but us and him, and he acted like he couldn't hear or see us. And then he seemingly got onto the elevator. Only when we reached the exact spot where we had clearly seen him step inside did we realize he had stepped into one of the vacant, closed elevator shafts. Our minds were reeling. Both Mike and Jake tried to make logical sense of what we had just witnessed. Maybe we just thought we saw him get into this one, but it was just a trick of perspective, Jake suggested. But that was impossible. If that had been the case, the doors of that elevator would not have closed by the time we reached where we saw the man walk. The doors always took more than 5 full seconds to close, and we had reached the spot where he vanished long before that was over. It was probably less than 3 seconds. All 3 of us stood there, completely perplexed. To this day I can't ducking explain it, and Jake gets annoyed if I bring it up, I think largely because he's an extremely rational person, and yet he can't explain it either. It was beyond strange and weird. And this guy wasn't transparent. He didn't look like ghosts do in the movies, he was solid, or so it seemed. Fully clothed in flesh and blood. And yet, this man vanished into the wall. He stepped onto a closed elevator that could never have opened to begin with. The next day I saw one of our friends who lived in that suite as I returned from class. "Hey, I have a weird question to ask you." I started. "Did you guys by any chance call a custodian to your suite last night around midnight? Did you have a plumbing emergency, or did anyone lock their keys in their room or something?" A puzzled and almost scared look spread across her face the second I asked this. "No," she replies, "we were all in bed by then. We all had super early morning classes today." At this moment I'm even more freaked out, and she could see it on my face. "Why?" she asked. I told her about the man and everything we had seen, which predictably freaked her the duck out. But she said she'd check with her suite mates to see if one of them had called in an emergency. She did check. And no one had called anyone to the suite that night. I have no clue what we saw or what we experienced that night, but it has deeply disturbed me ever since. This is one of the strangest, most unsettling experiences I've ever had, and I've never had a supernatural encounter before or after. And to this day, none of us are able to explain it. It was as if this man the three of us all saw wasn't there at all. My girlfriend's supernatural story from 2024. At the beginning of 2024, she was emotionally very fragile, and on top of that, she was studying 12 hours a day, full time. At some point, she started feeling like she was being watched at night. For example, she would look at a spot in her room and feel like there was something there. This caused even more sleep deprivation. After that, she started feeling watched not only at night but also on the street. She felt presences behind her while walking, saw shadow figures, etc. This stopped for a while because she went through a period of depersonalization, but it came back later. One night, she woke up in the middle of the night, and when she looked in the mirror, she didn't recognize herself. She felt like she was another person, something different. This caused her to develop an intense fear of mirrors. After that, everything that had happened before came back, but much stronger. She actively saw things and heard sounds, not normal house noises like furniture cracking, but actual knocks. To make things worse, she tried opening the window to relieve the feeling of pressure, but when she did, she felt something watching her. That put her into a cycle where, no matter what she did, there was always something with her. Her life became centered around this. She always imagined a tall man with a goat's head, but she felt like it wasn't something created by her mind. She believed it was projecting itself into her mind. After that, the sleep paralysis episodes started happening constantly. She felt weight on top of her and whispers she couldn't understand, and eventually she started seeing things during the paralysis. This completely stopped her from living her life. Over time, everything got much worse. Every night, all of this happened at the same time, and she eventually just accepted that something was following her. Until one day, she woke up in the morning and couldn't move, but it wasn't sleep paralysis. She could feel her body and felt like she had control, as if she was just standing still. Then a figure appeared, a completely black goat standing upright, staring at her. It didn't move or do anything at first. At some point, it spoke to her. It introduced itself and said its name, which my girlfriend says is the one thing she absolutely cannot remember. It then said that she had called it at some point and that she should have been prepared to deal with it. Since she wasn't, it became irritated. It kept saying that she shouldn't have done this, that she messed with something she didn't understand, and that now she was feeling it for real. Then it offered her something she also can't remember, in exchange for a glass of wine that she would have to leave inside the wardrobe, where she used to hear the noises, during a full moon. It said that if she didn't want to continue anymore, all she had to do was say so, but it made it very clear that if she chose to stop, she should never mention its name again. She said she didn't want to continue. Then it simply turned into a normal goat, went down on all fours, and disappeared. After that experience, she never felt or experienced any of those things again. Does anyone know what could have happened to her? What could this have been? Multiple encounters. 1. When I was around 5, my grandpa died maybe 4 to 6 months prior, and I was with my grandma and her friend on our way back home from church in the middle of the night. On our way home my grandma's headlights blew, it was also raining, so we were in complete darkness. Then an orb of light appeared in front of my grandma's car and guided us all the way home. My grandma believed it was my grandpa's spirit. 2. The same grandma had been telling me for 1 or 2 years that my grandpa talks to her while she sits in his favorite recliner, informing her about my aunt and uncle, who were using drugs at the time, and reassuring her that they would be alright and to go to bed because he was watching over them. Well, being a kid and not being so sure about Grandma's stories, I decided to sit in his chair and rock, saying his name and asking him to talk to me. After about 5 minutes of me doing this, I looked over at the couch, and there was my ducking grandpa. I almost screamed, but before I did, he said, "Don't be afraid, I will never hurt you. I wanted to tell you to be a good boy and look after your grandma. One day you will be the leader of this family, and you will do a great job." I burst into tears because I hadn't seen him since his funeral, and when I went to hug him, he allowed me to do so, but then he disappeared before I could fully embrace him. Then my grandma came into the living room and asked why I was crying, and she told me, "I told you." 3. Once again, my grandpa. Multiple people in my family said they encountered his ghost. First were my aunt and uncle, who still lived on my grandma's land but refused to pay lot rent. In the middle of the night, they were in bed when the covers were pulled off. When they looked at the foot of the bed, they saw my grandpa's ghost giving them an eat shit look. He vanished, and they heard his laughter echoing throughout the house. They paid my grandma first thing in the morning. 4. Same, grandpa. At my grandma's house, my uncle, the one on drugs, had his then girlfriend over. They just finished their thing, and my uncle went to pee. Well, his girlfriend looked over, thinking my uncle came back into the room, but saw what she described as a man who looked similar to my uncle but a little shorter in some pants with suspenders and thick framed glasses, and he was shaking his head at her. She screamed, and the ghost disappeared, and my uncle came into the room to ask what happened. She was crying and hysterical. My uncle inquired about the appearance of the man, then produced a photograph of my grandfather that she had never seen before, and it was the exact outfit. They moved out about 2 weeks from then. 5. This is about my great uncle who has passed away. He was a really nice guy. He never married or had any children, but he treated my mom like his child and bought lots of baby stuff for me and my brother. Anyways, he started to get in bad health and moved in with me and my family. I was probably 11 at the time. He was sleeping on our couch because we lived in a 2-bedroom trailer, and my brother and I shared bunk beds. He died in his sleep on our couch from a heart attack. Despite not having much money, my mom used his life insurance money to have him cremated and hold a ceremony. Well, about a week or 2 down the road, my whole family started noticing something. My uncle was a bit of a prankster and liked to make jokes and watch cartoons. He was also heavy-footed, and the doctors recommended him to walk from one end of our trailer to another multiple times a day to lower his risk of having a heart attack. Well, around 1 to 2 a.m., which I believe was when he died. We would constantly hear the sound of heavy footsteps moving from the front to the back of the trailer until my mind commanded me to stop. My great-uncle's name, and the noise would stop, and we'd hear my uncle laughing. This continued for about a month until my mom finally had enough and screamed, "God damn it, Judd, I said stop." And the footsteps stopped, but there wasn't any laughing. It never happened again. 6. Other times I've seen an occasional ghost that I didn't know growing up. One time I saw the ghost of a runaway slave around where the KKK used to burn people at the stake. Scared the shit out of me. I was deer hunting with my dad, and he told me to stay by this tree while he was sneaking up on one. I started hearing branches snapping and what I thought were footsteps. Then I looked up and saw a big black hand grab the tree, and then I saw what looked like a big black man in torn up clothes with blood on them, sweating all over and breathing like he had been running for miles. He yelled, "Help." I screamed like hell, and my dad eventually came back to the tree, mad, asking why I scared the deer off. Later in my life, while walking around the woods, I found 2 old burnt stakes in the ground. I asked my dad what they were, and he told me there used to be KKK rallies held up there way back in the day, and they'd end people. 7. I've also astral projected while I was in my mother's womb and met my great-grandmother, who wasn't alive when I was born. My parents were visiting at her house, and my great-grandma was an African American raised as a Cherokee Indian. She was very spiritual and smoked a lot of pot. She lived to be 107. Anyways, I astral projected as a fetus. I remember exploring my great-grandma's house, which I've never been to. Until eventually I found her. She recognized me and told me I was a spirit walker. Specifically, she said, "Oh, we have another spirit walker in our family." I didn't get to talk to her because I couldn't talk, but she said nice things to me like you would to a baby. Years later down the road my mom was telling about my great-grandma. She was on my dad's side of the family, and I said, "Oh, I did." My mom is extremely skeptical of anything spiritual/religious, so she thought I was lying. I described to her my great-grandma's house, what she looked like, and the breathing machine she was on, down to the pipe she had on her dresser. My mom was beyond shocked and didn't know how to explain that. I've astral projected a couple more times while I was young but can't seem to do it now that I'm older. Years ago I worked as a manager in a small grocery store, so I was often there super late by myself after closing to finish things up. My supervisor and another employee told me that I probably wouldn't want to stay too late there by myself, because they said it was haunted and that sometimes you could hear a buggy rolling through the aisles. I thought they were joking and trying to scare me since I was new to the job and just starting to close the store alone. Well, one night after a particularly busy day, I had more to do than usual after closing and was there until about 1 a.m. by myself. By this point I had forgotten all about what they had said, and then I heard it. The unmistakable sound of a buggy rolling down the next aisle over. I looked, and there was nothing there, so I did a lap and checked all around the whole store, nothing. As soon as I started working again, I heard it again. That time, I knew there was nothing that could make the sound. I ignored it and hurried to finish up while it was basically following me across the store, always the next aisle over. I was fine until I was ready to leave and was headed toward the front, when I saw a bag of chips lying on the floor that had fallen off the end cap. I picked them up and put them back in place, and as soon as I did, something else fell about 5 feet away down the aisle. When I started toward it, something else fell about 5 more feet ahead of the first thing, and I stood there watching a chain of stuff fly off the shelf all the way down the aisle to the other end. I ran down a different aisle to the front doors, then realized I needed to set the alarm, so I went back into the store a little ways to put the code into the security system, which was mounted on the wall across from the registers. The code wasn't working even though it was absolutely correct, and then, I heard a phone ring, not the store phone or mine but one of the register phones. Each of the 5 registers had a phone that didn't receive incoming calls to the store, they were only used for the intercom or to call other phones in the store. There was one in the produce room at the back and one in the manager's office, also in the back but on the opposite side, and they all had unique codes to dial. After the first register phone rang and stopped, another register phone rang and stopped, followed by the phone in the produce room ringing, and then all of the phones started ringing at once. As I was trying to set the alarm, it finally activated, allowing me to quickly leave the premises. I told my supervisor about it later, and he was just like, "Yep, I told you." The phone thing hadn't happened that badly to him, but he believed me because one time he'd had 1 or 2 of them go off before when he was leaving. I still worked there for almost a year after that, and every now and then odd things would happen, but not as much like that night. My supernatural experience. I was born and raised in Germany, but I am Turkish. And growing up with a mostly Muslim population also comes with its own horror stories about jinn. When I turned 14, we moved back to a small village in Turkey. It was a huge culture shock when my twin sister and I started hearing horror stories about these creatures. We found it absolutely cool that creatures could exist, and we were super into these stories, horror movies, and the supernatural in general. My grandpa, the coolest guy ever, would tell us scary stories but laugh at the end because he thought we would be scared. I was 16 years old when my grandma died, and I remember being devastated and heartbroken since we had been living with her for years. I felt like my mother died. Grandpa died after 3 years. She died in Germany, so by the time she was sent to the village, it was 7 days past. Our religion's burial tradition does not require caskets. Instead, the deceased are wrapped in white cloth and buried slightly leaned to one side, which I have always found interesting. Additionally, if one fulfills a specific cleaning ritual, abdest, it is said that they can see the deceased. I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that she was gone. My twin and I went back to the house to our rooms, which are beside my grandparents' room. Our parents and their siblings are already fighting in the living room about money and property. I have started dreaming of lying in a grave. My grandma's grave was seeing everything through her eyes. I started to fly to the 6-story building, which was our home, and stopped right in front of the balcony where all the siblings were fighting. I immediately woke up when I came close to the balcony. I woke up to my grandpa entering the room to open the small window that we had. He looked at me, and I started telling him what happened. I didn't want to make him upset, obviously, but this was not the first time this happened. He opened his hands, started praying and blowing air on me, and kissed the top of my head and said, "It's all good now." I am tearing up writing this. A year later it's me, my twin sister, and my grandpa's house. My mom and dad are going through a divorce, and my mom moved to another city and wants to take us with her. We don't want to leave my grandpa alone, so we are living with him. And he is super happy to have us. One day I fell asleep and started dreaming in the same bed again, my back turned to the window. We are on the balcony, my mom is holding a coffee mug, and there is a dwarf/super short man standing next to her saying they are getting married. I lose it and start yelling at my mom, who then points down the street and says, Look. I look down to see a slim man in jeans and no shirt walking towards the building. I am leaning down looking at him. At one point I lose sight, then he comes back out and is missing his arms from the shoulders, blood gushing. I ran down the stairs, and he was not there anymore, but the neighbor was crying, holding her house key, saying they were trying to take it and invade the house. I am super confused trying to hold her hand. Then the guy reappears and takes the key from her hand, now he has arms again, and runs to the house. The inside of the house is pitch black, although the door and windows are open, it is completely dark inside. Suddenly, the house begins to pull in everything around it, including me. I hold on to a pole on the street and barely escape. Then I woke up in full-on sleep paralysis. I can't move, facing the wall, but I start seeing light, so the sun must be rising. My grandpa wakes up early for morning prayers, and the first thing he does is come to our room and slightly open the window to let fresh air in. I waited like that for I don't know how long, tears running down my eyes. I started hearing his footsteps, and as soon as he opened the door, I bolted from the bed. He saw my state and freaked out too, I guess. After his prayers, he made tea, and I told him what happened. He told me that those neighbors practiced black magic or would go to hokas, men of religion who are in cahoots with these creatures that can put dark spells on people. He also said there is always a meaning behind dreams. He also mentioned that they are jealous of my grandpa because he owns more land and that they might have cast a spell on us. Fast forward a year later, we move in with my mom in a new city. On our first day at the new high school, we are seated in class for the first lesson in philosophy. The door opens and a dwarfish man walks in. It's the guy in my ducking dream. My sister immediately holds my arms and looks me in the eye. I knew, she knew, and it was so weird. And before you ask, no, my mom didn't remarry. Obviously trauma and stories feed the imagination, but I believe some of this stuff is real. If anybody else has experienced stuff like this, I would love to talk about it. This was my father's side. On my mom's side there are even more stories about these genes. And would love to share those as well one day. This was the first supernatural experience I truly allowed myself to witness. All throughout my life, things would happen, minor or major, that I would write off to coincidence. Or simply nothing. I refused to truly open my eyes. I was extremely stubborn. The events of the last week have forever changed my entire existence. I have always been interested in things spooky or spiritual. My username is what it is because I just thought it sounded cool, lol. I decided randomly to buy a set of tarot cards. I don't know where the desire came from. There was nothing that I saw to make me even think of cards. But out of nowhere I had to buy them. I didn't even think about why. I got the cards and admired their aesthetic but ultimately put them away because I wasn't entirely sure what to do with them. They sat next to my bed for the next 3 months. Rarely thought of. Tiny backstory, I'm going through an awful divorce. I am also dealing with an extremely stressful job, I am going through so much transition, so I'm just stressed. So my mind is constantly running. This week my sleep has been horrible. I was either sleeping too much or sleeping too little. One night I was in my bed, so comfy and about to drift to sleep. I believe I had actually fallen asleep when suddenly my eyes opened, and I felt compelled to retrieve my tarot cards. I jumped out of bed without a thought as to why or what I was doing to do with them. I grabbed my cards to do a self-reading, apparently. I pulled a card extremely relevant to my present life, and I was just in awe of how much helpful information I was reading. I decide I have to get a piece of paper to write this all down. I look everywhere for paper. There is no paper in any of my usual spots that I would keep paper. Next thing I know, I am standing in my closet. I am standing in front of a shelf that I never use. In fact, it is the shelf my ex-husband uses and had just cleaned out. On the bottom shelves there were books. I moved a few books around, and then I noticed a journal. I am immediately confused because I haven't seen this journal in 12 years. I picked it up, trying to figure out how this journal ended up on this shelf. The last time I saw it, I lived in England. I now live back in the States. I open the book just truly in disbelief, and then I realize. The journal is from my dad. I gave it to my dad in 2009 right before I moved to England. I asked him to please write his recipes in the journal so that I'd never lose them. My dad died unexpectedly in 2013. I'm staring at this journal in amazement, thinking, wow. I can't believe I found this. And at this moment? That is so beyond strange. I was like, well, I am so glad I found this. For a few days afterwards, I thought to myself, that was a really cool experience that night. I need to get the cards out again. But it didn't feel right? Like I couldn't force it. So yesterday, I decided out of nowhere, I hate this area by my front door. I hate it, and I need to replace the vase there with something else. I can't tell you why. I don't care about the decor there. I look in all my regular spots where I'd have decorations and can't find what I'm looking for. Next thing I know, I'm standing in my closet again. I'm standing in that same corner looking at the shelf, and there are these old ornate candlestick holders in my hands. I haven't seen these since England. I'm standing there about to cry. Because it's all so bizarre, and my closet light starts flashing. And I turn around to look at it. As I go to look at it, I notice on the top shelf of my closet, a plain white office box. It is the box that was brought home from my dad's work office with his belongings after he passed. His ashes are also in there. It all hit me at once. This is my dad. That closet light began flashing 2 months ago. And it only did so when I was present in the room. I told my then husband, "Please fix the light because it's going crazy," he said. "I have never seen it flash. It started to flash only when I'm in there." Right when things started to go so downhill with my husband. The subtle reminders of my dad and my time in England remind me of a time when I was truly happy. I moved from England in 2013. The night I found that journal was the night I first cooked dinner in months. My dad was trying to tell me that I needed to return to cooking. It'll bring back your happiness. He probably led me to my old candlestick holders because I put them away when my ex didn't like them. I put everything away, including my true self, and now my dad is trying to help me reconnect with who I really am. I had a dream right after my dad's death. In the dream, I am sitting next to him in the living room of the home I grew up in. I am crying and telling him I can't be without him. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "I will always be with you. I will never not be here for you. You won't see me, but I'll be here with you." I snapped awake with tears streaming down my face. I remember my mom happened to walk in right as I woke up. I told her about the dream, and she said it was so sweet he came to tell me that. I said to her, "No, Mom, that is stupid. It was just a dream that my brain made up." I feel so stupid now after all these years. He has been trying to tell me he's here since 2013, and I refuse to see it. I was so stubborn. There have been constant things that have happened that are just too much for simple coincidence. Both my sisters have called me multiple times to tell me crazy things that happened that just didn't make sense, and it somehow involved our dad. I would always think they were so silly. I can't believe I was so closed-minded all these years. This has all been truly life-changing. I am so grateful I finally let my eyes see.